Hey everyone, per your requests, I'm starting Sword of Coming, chapters 531 through 540 of the previous episode. In Old Dragon City, Qian Pingan's journey takes a dark turn. After successfully guiding the Yao clan's forces and navigating the capital's political minefields, Qian is ambushed by elite cultivators, including the lethal Du Mao, who seeks his treasures. During the brutal skirmish, Qian is pushed to the brink of death, suffering severe injuries while defending the innocent. Just as all seems lost, the appearance of the noble scholar Zhong Kuei and a sudden shift in the city's fortune bring a temporary, albeit fragile, respite. Amidst the chaos, Qian Pingan uncovers more about his own identity and his unique status as a pure martial artist, walking the path of the Great Tao. As he prepares to depart for the Sword Qi Great Wall, he entrusts his treasures, including the precious jade tablet, to his companions. Meanwhile, powerful figures from across the continents converge, drawn by the unfolding events. As Qian stands at the edge of his next great challenge, he remains steadfast, his resolve strengthened by the memory of Ning Yao and his own maturing spirit, ready to face whatever trials await him in his pursuit of becoming a great sword immortal. If possible, you can support me via PayPal, or become a channel member to help me keep this channel running. Thank you. Now let's get back to the story of Sword of Coming audio series. Chapter 541, Beneath the Sea of Clouds. Time had come to a complete standstill in the entire section of Old Dragon City west of the Dragon Scaling Platform and north of the Ferry Station Island. In the instant that Fan Junmao caught sight of the pristine white figure descending from the heavens, a look of boundless yearning and reminiscence appeared on her face. In the end, she was so moved that she was brought to the point of tears. She rose to her feet and opened her mouth to speak, but didn't know what to say, and in the end, she sat down onto the sea of clouds in the most formal and respectful posture possible, as if she were greeting someone who deserved the utmost respect and admiration. Over at the dust medicinal shop, Pei Qian was holding her hiking pole while unleashing her deranged demon sword techniques in the alley outside the shop, completely oblivious to the changes that had taken place in the environment around her, and the fact that the Zhao clan Yin had already fallen completely still. There was a short old man from a wealthy clan in the outer city, and he was just about to step out of his manor when his brows furrowed ever so slightly. After a brief hesitation, he withdrew his foot again, then stood on the spot in a completely still manner, with only his eyes darting around from side to side. Following a brief moment of contemplation, he released his Yin soul from his body instead of physically leaving his manor. Over at the eastern gate of Old Dragon City, the face of the old maidservant from the Cloud Forest Zhang clan was bright red with strain. Her bonded flying sword was buzzing and trembling in her acupoint, and only then was she just barely able to make out some blurry scenes unfolding before her. The patriarch of Parasol Leaf Sect was observing the hole in the city wall through narrowed eyes, and his sword-devouring arc was hovering peacefully by his side. Out of the hole that had been smashed into the city wall emerged a tall woman dressed in a pristine white robe with loose and free-flowing sleeves. She sat down onto a pile of loose rocks, and she was gently cradling a young man in her arms. The young man's golden sweet Windao robe had been virtually completely destroyed, and he had fallen unconscious from his severe injuries. The woman lowered her head and extended a finger to gently smooth out the young man's tightly furrowed brow. If it wasn't for the fact that the Tassel Mountain God did me a huge favor and allowed me to jump straight to the northern region of Eastern Treasured Vile Continent, the entire world would already be aware of your arrival right now. How is Qian Pingan supposed to continue cultivating in peace if that happens? The woman offered no response, and a sheepish look crept onto the old scholar's face as he heaved a forlorn sigh. He paid no heed to the patriarch of Parasol Leaf Sect at all as he strode over to the edge of the city wall, and he suppressed the fury in his own heart as he yelled, "Come out! Haven't you two been watching the show this entire time? Are you too scared to show yourselves now?" An indistinct, ethereal figure appeared in the north. It was a middle-aged scholar with a golden jade pendant hanging from his waist, upon which were inscribed the words, "Nourishing the Noble Spirit." Another figure that was just as blurry and indistinct appeared in the south, also a scholar, but this one was quite elderly in appearance. He also had a golden jade pendant hanging from his waist, this one reading, "Those in high places should help the less privileged." The middle-aged scholar extended a respectful bow toward the scholarly sage, while the elderly scholar remained completely unmoved, not even batting an eyelid in the scholarly sage's direction. The scholarly sage took a deep breath, then pointed at the patriarch of Parasol Leaf Sect as he cast his gaze toward the elderly scholar and said, "You are the sage responsible for overseeing matters in the northern region of Parasol Leaf Continent. If it were a 10th or 11th tier chi refiner roaming the land, then you can perhaps make an excuse and say that you have too much on your plate in the heavens, so it simply slipped your notice, but this is an ascension tier chi refiner. Have you gone blind? How could you possibly have missed such a huge lantern drifting past your damn eyes?" The elderly scholar offered no response. The middle-aged scholar heaved a faint sigh. He had actually been notified in advance that Du Mao was going to be making a trip to Old Dragon City of Eastern Treasured Vile Continent, which was under his jurisdiction. This trip of his concerned the Song clan of the Greatly Empire, Planchette Writing Sect, and Peace and Tranquility Mountain, so prior to leaving Parasol Leaf Sect, Du Mao had already reported his intentions to the elderly scholar. However, due to the abrupt nature of his trip, he didn't have time to request a passport from the Confucian schools, so the middle-aged scholar could only turn a blind eye. The restrictions placed on Ascension-tier cultivators were enforced as part of a non-negotiable rule established by the etiquette sage, a rule that had been met with much opposition. There were even some powerful cultivators who openly mocked the etiquette sage for his unconditional love of all living beings. There were so many demons in Majestic World, yet not only was he not taking action to eradicate them, he was enforcing strict rules on his own people. For cultivators of a certain cultivation base, anything that they did had to be reported to and approved by the Confucian schools. In contrast, in Heavenly World overseen by the three branches of Taoism, Ascension-tier cultivators could choose to stay in the White Jade capital or leave as they pleased, so why was it that all Ascension-tier cultivators were kept on a leash in Majestic World? Du Mao was starting to grow a little disgruntled, and he clasped one hand behind his back while scratching his head with the other as he asked, "So you're the scholarly sage?" However, the scholarly sage continued to completely ignore him as he said to the two scholars, "Both of you are prized disciples of the second sage. I'm sure that he's taught both of you the importance of having empathy and shame." The word empathy was directed at the middle-aged scholar presiding over the southern region of Eastern Treasured Vile Continent, while the word shame was directed at the elderly scholar who had allowed Du Mao to travel to Old Dragon City. Scholars who were able to enter the Confucian temples to have statues erected alongside the founding father of Confucianism could certainly be considered as sages, and their sagely status would have even more weight than the status of a Confucian Academy's mountain master. However, under the rules of Majestic World's Confucian orthodoxy, these two were still considered to be saints, of which there were officially 72. The scholarly sage continued, "Your teacher has also said that life and justice are both desirable things, but if one can only choose to have one of the two, then one must sacrifice their life for the pursuit of justice. Right now, Chan Ping'an is teaching you that lesson. The second sage clearly did a terrible job of teaching this lesson, so it's only right that the two of you relearn it from a child." A cold look appeared on the elderly scholar's face and he said, "You no longer have a place in the Confucian temples, and your scholarly lineage has also been severed, so you should speak of my teacher with more respect." The scholarly sage was even more infuriated and he snapped, "I'm already doing him a favor by not calling him an old bastard. Who the hell do you think you are? It's only thanks to your useless writings and worthless theoretical prose that you were able to fraudulently claim a spot in the Confucian temples." The elderly scholar remained expressionless, but a hint of a mocking sneer was playing on his lips. The scholarly sage patted himself on the chest to calm himself down as he murmured to himself, "Don't get mad, use your words and morality to make others see the light." He then heaved a faint sigh as he asked, "The two of you are well aware that I'm powerless to do anything to you right now, and that's why you dare to oppose me, isn't that right?" The middle-aged scholar shook his head in response. "I don't dare to cause you any offense, nor do I desire to do so." A cold sneer appeared on the elderly scholar's face as he scoffed. "Your teachings are like a dead fly that's fallen into a pot of delicious broth. It's a putrid stain that has marred the legacy of our Confucian orthodoxy." He then took a step forward and asked, "I'm saying this right to your face, what are you going to do?" The scholarly sage was enraged to the point of bursting into laughter. "Back when I was at the height of my powers, you studied my teachings and my books like a diligent child. Have you forgotten about that? If I recall correctly, you even went to Cui Chan to beg him to teach you. How did that end for you? Cui Chan hasn't done many good things in his life, but was certainly spot on when he denounced you for a fool who learned nothing from the second sage aside from his pretentiousness. He also suggested that the Confucian orthodoxy should introduce a title of phony noble person for people like you. And if there's one truth he ever said in his life, that's it. A wry smile appeared on the middle-aged scholar's face, while the elderly scholar displayed remarkable mental fortitude, remaining calm and collected despite the scathing insults being hurled at him. The scholarly sage raised his head to look up at the sky as he murmured to himself, "A noble person can deceive others within the realm of reason." That's something that the second sage said himself. I know that your intention was to place another set of shackles onto the scholars of the world, resonating with our founding fathers' teaching of seeing self-restraint and adherence to proper etiquette as a virtue. But take a look at this world. Your intentions were good, but everything has strayed far from the right path. There's no need to look at anyone else, just take a look at this disciple of yours. It's precisely because of this that the mountain master of a Confucian school, a disciple of the etiquette sage, had to go and beg Bai Zhe to intervene. What was his response? He said that he wanted to see more of the world before making his decision. What more is there to see? If you ask me, I think he's already seen more than enough. This world is no longer the place that it once was, and people's hearts have changed. What did we say to each other last time? We were exchanging ideas? Both of us were convinced that even though the great Tao has changed, the people now can still be better than the people of old. Looking back now, what a joke that has become. The middle-aged scholar cast his gaze toward the elderly scholar, then smiled as he suggested, "Maybe you should apologize." "What do I have to apologize for?" the elderly scholar asked. The middle-aged scholar was silent for a moment, then said, "Severing one's scholarly lineage is something that should only be limited to targeting one's teachings. You're asking the masses to choose who they think is right, rather than swaying mass opinion by force. Right now, an Ascension Tier Chi refiner is provoking a divine lord who is acknowledged by the four sages and has attacked a young man who may well be a disciple of the scholarly sage, and that's both inappropriate and against the teachings of Confucianism. I only see the bigger picture and what's good for the continuation of the heritage of Confucianism," the elderly scholar replied flatly. The middle-aged scholar could only shake his head in response. The scholarly sage sat down on the edge of the hole that had been blasted into the wall, then sighed to himself. "Whether you think I'm right or not, there are some principles that stand regardless. It's just that you don't understand them." Right at this moment, the white-robed woman asked in a cold voice, "Are you done?" The scholarly sage nodded in response, and his shoulders sank down as he folded his hands over his knees in a deflated manner. "I'm done. I've been concealing your aura the entire way here, and I've just had to lecture a pair of ignorant fools. Right now I'm completely exhausted. Founding Father, Etiquette Sage, Second Sage, it looks like all of these teachings that I've developed are going to be returned to this world untouched." The white-robed woman gently set down Chan Ping'an, then rose to her feet and strode over to the scholarly sage's side as she said, "If you're done, then it's time for me to say what I want to say. Let me make this clear in advance. If you dare to get in my way, I'll—" The scholarly sage shook his head as he interjected, "I won't try to get in your way. It's all because of my incompetence that little Chi had to die, and now little Ping'an is on the verge of death as well. I've failed these two disciples of mine. I can't even stop some people who are scrambling to eat shit. Why would I try to stop you when you have reason and justice on your side?" Du Mao had been watching the unfolding scene this entire time, and he smiled as he asked, "Who are you? I don't recall ever hearing of someone like you. Are you an Ascension Tier cultivator? Surely you're not an Ascension Tier cultivator who's come all this way from Stalactite Mountain?" A peculiar look appeared in the middle-aged scholar's eyes, and he took a glance at the elderly scholar in the south, who had a grim look on his face. It was clear that he was feeling much more pressure in her presence than when facing the scholarly sage. The white-robed woman yawned as she took a step forward, descending to the foot of the city wall before slowly continuing onward. There was an old and rusty sword blade hanging from her waist. It had no guard or hilt, but its tip had been sharpened to an extremely bright gleam. "You'll be breaking the rules of this world if you dare to attack," the elderly scholar warned in a stern voice. The woman merely continued onward while yawning as if she had only just woken up. The old blade wasn't tied very securely to her waist, so it was gently swaying from side to side as she walked, and its sharp tip was flashing incessantly. Du Mao's mind was racing as he tucked his hands up his sleeve, trying to use divination to glean the depths of the woman's power, only to discover that this entire area had already been restricted by someone, making divination completely impossible. While walking toward Du Mao, the woman turned to the middle-aged scholar and said, "You're not so bad compared with your little friend over there, so I'll spare you. Get out of here." The middle-aged scholar's brows furrowed slightly upon hearing this, but he noticed that the scholarly sage was waving a dismissive hand at him. After a brief hesitation, he faded out of this area, which was still completely frozen in time. The woman then turned to the elderly scholar, and she was far less kind to him as she ordered, "Piss off. Are you really going to oppose the great Tao of this world?" the elderly scholar asked in a solemn voice. The woman cocked her head to the side, then gently pressed a finger down onto the top of the old blade as she murmured to herself, "I've only sharpened the tip so far, but that should be enough to cleave Stalactite Mountain into two. How about I open a door between Majestic World and Savage World?" The elderly scholar's expression changed drastically. She completely ignored him as she gently thrust her old blade forward. He then vanished with a flash. The blade vanished into thin air in the blink of an eye, and a huge hole was torn into the sky of the artificial small world around her before hurtling towards Stalactite Mountain, covering immeasurable distances in the blink of an eye. The scholarly sage remained completely aloof and uncaring. On the vast sea between Southern World Continent and Parasol Leaf Continent, a swordsman abruptly raised his head. All of a sudden, the entire sea up ahead seemed to have parted, sending waves as tall as mountains crashing toward the shore. These waves naturally posed no threat to the swordsman, but he was stunned by the aura of the flying sword. Since when was there a swordsman in Majestic World? Has Aoyang been forced down from the heavens by the Taoist's second disciple again? No, that can't be right. Even Aoyang doesn't have a sword. Out of the 4 best swords in the 4 worlds, one of them had been passed down for generations to the great Heavenly Master of Middle-earth Divine Continent's Heavenly Master residence. One of them was in the possession of the scholar who proclaimed himself to be lacking in intellect and aptitude, yet was able to slice the Yellow River apart with a single sword strike. The third one was in the possession of the Taoist's second disciple, and it was said that Aoyang had gone off in search for the final one following his departure from Stalactite Mountain. The sword that he proclaimed was the one to rule them all. That sword should have been a perfect match for him, yet somehow, he failed to secure it and could only ascend to the heavens beyond heavens empty-handed. Instead of setting off in pursuit of that peerless flying sword, he abruptly snapped back to his senses before immediately setting off for the southernmost region of Eastern Treasured Vile Continent. The elderly scholar stabbed a finger in the woman's direction as he yelled in a furious voice, "Have you gone insane?" The woman continued onward without pause. Du Mao gulped nervously before asking, "Are you still going to challenge me even after throwing your sword away?" An amused look appeared on her face, as if she had just heard a hilarious joke, and she scoffed, "Challenge? You think you're worthy of being challenged by me? You have no idea who I am, do you? I suppose you can't be blamed, given how young you are." The scholarly sage suddenly burst into raucous laughter as he yelled, "Do you know who was the one that slew the largest treasure-swallowing whale under the heavens in ancient times?" "I do, but I'm not going to tell you." She strode directly over to Du Mao, standing no further away from him than Zheng Dafeng had earlier. Due to her tall frame, she was able to look down upon Du Mao, and she did so with a frosty look in her eyes. "Why don't you try and attack me with this bonded celestial weapon of yours? I'm not going to move at all. Seriously, give it a try." "Insolent wench." Du Mao roared as his sword-devouring arc hurtled directly toward the woman's head. It was only a distance of a few meters, so the celestial weapon was able to cover the distance in the blink of an eye. But to the astonishment of Du Mao and the elderly scholar, the sword-devouring arc hovered in front of her face while trembling incessantly with instinctive fear, as if it were cursing Du Mao for placing it in this terrible situation. The woman pointed a finger downward and instructed, "Get down now, you're blocking my view." The sword-devouring arc immediately began to descend like a docile pet, drawing to a halt beside her foot, only for her to still kick it aside anyway. Du Mao raised a thumb before wiping it over his own lips, and anyone who was familiar with him knew that this was the habitual gesture that he always made when he was about to go all out. The woman heaved a faint sigh, then said to Du Mao, "You're a lucky guy to have only lost a bonded item. That sword strike was meant for you. However, you won't be so lucky the next time I appear on Parasol Leaf Continent." Right at this moment, a giant sleeved hand suddenly descended out of the sky where the hole in heaven and earth had just been torn open earlier, and it grabbed onto the old blade between two of its fingers, upon which the entire arm immediately began trembling. It was clear that even though only the tip of the blade had been sharpened, it was proving rather difficult to stop. At the same time, an authoritative voice rang out from beyond this world, reprimanding her. "Don't do that again." The white-robed woman turned around and asked, "Would you like me to open things up between Majestic World and Heavenly World instead?" The owner of the arm remained hidden, and with a flick of his wrist, his sleeve surged forth like a turbulent river, swallowing up the elderly scholar as he scolded, "Come back with me to repent for your actions in the Confucian Temple. Someone's in trouble now." The scholarly sage chuckled with more than a hint of schadenfreude in his voice. The owner of the giant hand gave a cold harumph. "You take care of this mess. The Confucian Temple is not going to get involved." The scholarly sage immediately flared up with rage as he yelled, "Why should I have to take care of this mess? Give me something in return. After that, I'm going to the Confucian Temple and throwing out all of the statues inside aside from the statue of the old man. After that, I'll move my own statue in. The old man has always been the most fond of me anyway." After capturing the elderly scholar with his sleeve, the owner of the giant hand sighed, "Fine, you can have this." As soon as his voice trailed off, the hole was closed, and a golden jade pendant drifted down from above. However, it wasn't the elderly scholar's jade pendant, the one that read, "Those in high places should help the less privileged." Instead, it was the middle-aged scholar's jade pendant, the one that read, "Nourishing the noble spirit." A pleased look appeared on the scholarly sage's face as he caught the jade pendant, and he said, "Finally, some minor compensation for all my hard work." The owner of the giant hand seemed to have been irked by the fact that the jade pendant was being referred to as minor compensation, and instead of immediately returning to Middle-earth Divine Continent, he left a vast, righteous aura lingering outside the small world. The scholarly sage looked up at the sky and yelled, "What? Do you want to fight as well? Should I tell you about how I lost that battle between third and fourth? Was it really because your scholarly principles were more sound than mine? If it wasn't for the fact that Qi Jingchun and Zhuyu were among my disciples." The scholarly sage rustled his sleeves and began bending his knees slightly as he spoke, preparing to sit down to reason with the almighty figure in the heavens. Only the sages of Confucianism and the upper 5 tiers immortals of Middle-earth Divine Continent had witnessed just how influential the scholarly sage was at the height of his powers, and how he had managed to crush the sages of Buddhism and Taoism. Even though Cui Chan had already turned his back on his master, even he couldn't help but be overcome with reverence whenever he spoke of this passage in history. The owner of the giant hand departed without a word. The scholarly sage stopped what he was doing, then looked up at the sky for a long time. Only after verifying that the figure in the heavens was well and truly gone did he bite down onto the golden jade pendant as he murmured to himself, "It's real. Looks like I didn't spout all that nonsense for nothing." The white-robed woman turned to Du Mao with a smile as she said, "It seems like you're even less fortunate than I imagined." The scholarly sage burst into laughter as he jeered, "Aren't you always complaining about the restrictions placed upon Ascension tier cultivators? In that case, she'll beat you back down to the unpolished jade tier, and you'll be able to go wherever you please then. You want to sever my scholarly lineage, don't you? How do you feel now? You have the worst luck out of anyone I've seen in the past 10,000 years. You should go and boast about it to whoever's willing to listen. Look after my master," the white-robed woman commanded as she turned back with a cold expression. The scholarly sage immediately settled down as he said in a sheepish manner, "Don't worry, I care about little Ping'an no less than you do." Du Mao rolled up his sleeves as he declared, "Even without my sword-devouring arc, I'm still an Ascension tier cultivator." A mocking sneer appeared on the scholarly sage's face as he swept a sleeve through the air, and the sky of the small world above Du Mao's head parted, creating an opening that was just large enough for him to fit through and return to Majestic World. Du Mao was finally beginning to lose his composure. Beyond the restrictions placed upon them by the rules of Confucianism, the main reason Ascension tier cultivators had to stay in various blessed lands without daring to come out was that if they were to come out, then they could easily attract backlash from the Great Tao. "Close it," the white-robed woman ordered as she raised her blade. And the scholarly sage nodded and did as he was told. Du Mao was beginning to panic a little now, but the aggression on his face didn't waver in the slightest as he asked, "Do you really place this young man in such high regard that you're willing to drive me into a corner? Oh, are you trying to reason with me now?" The white-robed woman chuckled. Indeed, Du Mao was trying to de-escalate things to reach a peaceful resolution. He had 3 objectives for this northbound trip, the first of which was to seize Wu Yu's swordsmanship for himself, the second was to probe Divine Lord Yang of Jewel Small World to see just how much he was willing to tolerate, and the third was to infiltrate Eastern Treasured Vile Continent on behalf of Parasol Leaf Sect. If the opportunity arose for him to sever the scholarly sage's lineage while he was fulfilling these 3 objectives, then he certainly didn't mind doing that on the side as well. At this point he had already completed 2 of those objectives, and it was clear that Zhuyu wasn't coming, so he would just have to make do with 2 out of 3. Hence, there really was no point for him to stay here any longer and endanger himself. Power was above all else among cultivators. At the very least, that was an idea that Du Mao had always subscribed to. The white-robed woman tightened her grip around her old blade as she asked, "Did you try to reason with my master earlier?" Du Mao remained completely unfazed as he scoffed. At his current cultivation base, he's nothing more than a useless piece of trash. If it wasn't because I wanted to lure out Zhuyu, he wouldn't even have been worthy of standing before me. The white-robed woman gestured with her free hand, and the scholarly sage reluctantly pulled out a scenic picture scroll as he sighed. "Try not to completely destroy it." As soon as Du Mao caught sight of the picture scroll, he immediately stowed his sword-devouring arc back into his acupoint without any hesitation, then summoned his golden Tao manifestation and forced the small world around him open before flying toward the South Sea. The white-robed woman made no effort to pursue him. The scholarly sage also just smiled as he casually tossed the picture scroll through the air. The white-robed woman and Du Mao's golden Tao manifestation vanished one after the other. Immediately thereafter, the scenic picture scroll drew to a halt, hovering directly in front of the scholarly sage. As for the small world that encompassed Old Dragon City, it was sealed once again, and aside from the old maidservant from the Cloud Forest Zhang clan, who was able to blink slightly, everyone else in the entire city was completely still and frozen in time. The sound of tearing fabric began to ring out incessantly from the picture scroll, and it was the sound of Du Mao's golden Tao manifestation and the white-robed woman's sword tearing through the world within the scroll. Every single tear was accompanied by a pained wince from the scholarly sage. No more than 15 minutes had passed by before the scholarly sage tapped a finger against a certain part of the picture scroll before tucking it up his sleeve. The white-robed woman slowly emerged out of thin air with the old blade hanging from her waist. Its sharpened tip had dulled ever so slightly. She was yawning into one hand and held a leg in the other. Du Mao was dragged out of the picture scroll behind her like a dead dog. "What was his name again?" the white-robed woman asked. The scholarly sage wiped the sweat from his forehead as he replied, "His name is Du Mao, and he's the most powerful cultivator on Parasol Leaf Continent aside from the old Taoist priest from the East Sea." The white-robed woman nodded in response, then tossed Du Mao's body aside as she said, "He has some tricks up his sleeve." In the instant that he forced this small world open, his own soul returned to his true body. As for this body, it's only a young soul avatar of his. A speechless look appeared on the scholarly sage's face as he mused, but even so, he's still a 12th tier cultivator. The white-robed woman sat down with her legs crossed beside Chan Ping'an, then gently cradled him in her arms as she cast her gaze into the distance and said, "In the face of my sword, it makes no difference whether he's a 12th or 13th tier cultivator." "What happened to the sword-devouring arc?" the scholarly sage asked. "I stopped suppressing it and allowed him to use it as he pleased, and after that, I destroyed it in battle. Otherwise, I would have come out long ago. I just wanted to see exactly what a so-called celestial weapon is all about," the white-robed woman replied in a nonchalant fashion. "How have things been going for you?" the scholarly sage asked as he wiped the sweat from his forehead. The white-robed woman looked down at Qian Ping'an's face to find that his brows were furrowed tightly, as if he were having a nightmare. Even though his injuries had been temporarily suppressed by the scholarly sage, there were definitely going to be some hard times ahead for him. She gently smoothed down his brows with her fingers as she replied. That cliff in the mountains of Jewel's small world was formed by the sword intent of my former owner, so it belongs to me to begin with. It's just that so many years have passed by that I can't be bothered to fight over ownership anymore. After that, I made a deal with Ruan, whatever his name was, granting him ownership of 30% of that chunk of dragon-slaying platform. The scholarly sage took a glance at the tip of the old sword blade hanging from her waist, then smiled as he asked, So you've been using Ruan Qiong's dragon-slaying platform to sharpen your sword these past few years? I've been using the one from True Martial Mountain, the white-robed woman replied. Ruan Qiong's piece is reserved for little Ping'an. The scholarly sage began sweating even more profusely upon hearing this. This isn't over yet, the white-robed woman said as she cast her gaze toward the south. The scholarly sage hurriedly shook his head as he replied, It's indeed not over yet, but your involvement in this matter ends here. Leave the rest to me. It's what's best for little Ping'an. The white-robed woman nodded in response. After I go back, I most likely won't be coming out again anytime soon. If I come out next time only to find that you've made an absolute mess of things, then you can be certain that I'll find you. I'm sure you're aware that after you've integrated yourself with the great Tao of Majestic World, I'm the only one left in this world who can kill you. Why be so hostile to me? We're on the same side, the scholarly sage said with a sheepish grin. The white-robed woman shook her head as she said, Everything was going fine, but you insisted on taking little Ping'an as your disciple, and that led to this disaster. If it wasn't for the fact that we're on the same side, I would have already cut you down by now. The scholarly sage glowered at her as he objected. Don't go saying hurtful things like that. Would you dare to say the same thing in the presence of your master? I wouldn't say it, but I would do it behind his back, the white-robed woman replied in a direct and straightforward manner. As for whether he'll continue to accept me when he finds out, it doesn't matter. Because he'll still be my master either way. The scholarly sage had no response to this. After the gift that she had presented to Qian Ping'an was shattered, 3 pieces of dragon-slaying platform had fallen out of it. They were all of different sizes, with the smallest one only roughly the size of a ruler, while the largest one was around the same size as a palatial floor tile. The white-robed woman made a beckoning motion to draw the 3 pieces of dragon-slaying platform to herself, then handed Qian Ping'an over to the scholarly sage as she said, I'm going to take care of some loose ends. Do be gentle. The scholarly sage sighed in a resigned manner. The white-robed woman offered no response as she began making her way toward the nascent tier maidservant from the Cloud Forest Jiang clan. She reached out with her index and middle fingers, forcibly plucking the maidservant's bonded flying sword out of her acupoint. As she held the bonded flying sword between her fingers, she began applying more force, causing the flying sword to bend like a bow. The old maidservant was completely immobilized in this small world, so she could only put on a pitiful, imploring expression. The white-robed woman turned to her as she scoffed. You're begging me to spare your flying sword? In that case, let's do things my master's way. Tell me why I should let you off the hook, and if I deem your reasoning to be sound, then I'll spare your flying sword. This was clearly an unreasonable demand. The old maidservant possessed nowhere near the power required to be able to speak in this small world, so she could only look on helplessly as the white-robed woman continued to exert more and more force through her fingers, causing the flying sword to bend further and further before abruptly snapping into 2. Blood immediately began flowing out of all of the old maidservant's orifices, while a crack appeared on her golden core, and her nascent soul was also howling in agony and grief. The white-robed woman smiled as she said, Honestly, I much prefer the way that you people like to do things, so I have to give you all a taste of your own medicine before little Ping'an wakes up. Once he does, I may not get another opportunity. As soon as her voice trailed off, she sprang up into the sky, ascending to the sea of clouds above Old Dragon City in the blink of an eye. Fan Junmao was still seated in that strange position, and she raised her head to reveal a pair of fervent eyes that were also filled with awe and veneration. The first thing that she said upon seeing the white-robed woman was, I didn't know that young man was your new master. The woman leaned down slightly in front of Fan Junmao as she smiled and asked, Should you be forgiven for not knowing? No, Fan Junmao replied with a shake of her head. Ignorance is the most severe transgression possible. An exasperated look appeared on the white-robed woman's face as she sighed. Why do you always look so pathetic whenever I see you? You're either sneaking off to the arch bridge to cry to the sea of clouds, or kneeling on the sea of clouds as you are now. How am I supposed to kill you when you're so pitiful and pathetic? If you're going to kill me, then do it, Fan Junmao urged with a bright gleam in her eyes. So long as you continue to exist, that's enough. The white-robed woman gently picked up her blade, then twirled it around in a circle before piercing it through Fan Junmao's heart and lifting her into the air. Did you think I wouldn't do it? Do you know how many people like you I've killed in the past? Blood began to flow from the corner of Fan Junmao's lips, but her eyes remained as bright and fervent as ever as she murmured, You haven't changed. You haven't changed at all. Even though it's been 10,000 years, you haven't changed in the slightest, and even in another 10,000 years, you won't change at all. As long as you wish for it to be so, this entire world will bow to you. And the white-robed woman turned around to take a glance at the city wall, then abruptly vanished from atop the sea of clouds. The old blade was also pulled out of Fan Junmao's chest before returning to her waist. Fan Junmao collapsed onto the sea of clouds with a hand clasped over her heart, and she immediately fell unconscious, but the sea of clouds then began surging into her body in a frenzy. Over at the hole in the city wall, Qian Ping'an had already woken up, but there was a rather dazed and confused look in his eyes. The scholarly sage was nowhere to be seen. However, Qian Ping'an spotted that familiar figure drifting down in front of him, hovering in midair outside the hole in the city wall. Did I do something wrong? He asked. The woman shook her head. I'll be more careful next time, Qian Ping'an promised. Maybe I'll learn the naturalist art of divination. I thought that I would be able to resolve this matter, but I didn't expect that cultivator to be so powerful. The white-robed woman shook her head once again. You're not disappointed in me? Qian Ping'an asked. The woman shook her head a third time. A warm smile appeared on Qian Ping'an's face upon hearing this, and his smile was mirrored by the white-robed woman. The river of time continued to slowly flow past outside the small world, and the friction between the two types of laws of heaven and earth created breathtaking rainbow-like ripples. Qian Ping'an and the sword spirit were seated side by side on the edge of the hole in the city wall with their feet dangling outside. Qian Ping'an looked down at his own abdomen to discover that the bleeding had already stopped and the flesh around the wound had already healed, but the gruesome mass of organs inside still presented a harrowing sight that could send shivers running down the beholder's spine. Even though it was nowhere near an all-out attack, it was still a wound inflicted by the bonded celestial weapon of an Ascension tier cultivator, and he was going to be suffering tremendous after-effects from the injury for a long time to come. In the distance, everyone was standing completely still on the spot, with the exception of the old maidservant who had just had her bonded flying sword snapped into two. She was constantly swaying from side to side ever so slightly, presenting a tragic sight to behold. After being knocked out, the unconscious Sun Jiaxu was handed over to an old steward. The vast majority of people had elated smiles on their faces. According to the sword spirit, Zhang Dafeng had had his spine snapped, so the pure true qi that he had nurtured as a 9th-tier martial artist had completely dissipated, reducing him to a cripple. However, the physical foundation that he had built up ensured that his body was still equivalent to that of a 5th or 6th-tier martial artist. She also told Qian Ping'an that the scholarly sage had volunteered to take care of this mess, and that he would ensure that Qian Ping'an didn't get the short end of the stick. For all of the benefits that Du Mao had received for his involvement in this matter, he was only going to lose even more, and this was nowhere near the end of the matter. As the two of them looked up at the sky of the small world together, the sword spirit suddenly said, I have to go. My sword sharpening cannot be delayed any further. A thought occurred to Qian Ping'an and he said, I have an oil paper umbrella capable of concealing auras. Why don't you take it, big sister immortal? You just said that even the scholarly sage's sworn enemy made an appearance and promised that I'll never have to face an old monster like Du Mao again. As long as I don't have to face a cultivator of the upper 5 tiers, I can look after myself, and I won't go looking for trouble either. Helping out Zhang Dafeng this time is only a one-off event. The sword spirit patted Qian Ping'an on the head as she nodded and said, Sure, I'll take it. Come to think of it, this is the first thing that you've ever given me. Qian Ping'an raised an eyebrow in objection. A justified look appeared on the sword spirit's face as she asked, "Are you thinking about that piece of dragon-slaying platform that appeared in your basket as you were crossing the river? That's not something that you gave me, I stole it myself." Qian Ping'an smiled as he asked, "What do you want, big sister immortal? I'll give you something else in addition to the oil paper umbrella. I've traveled a very long way, and I'm going to continue traveling from here onward, so I may run into something that you'll like." The sword spirit turned to him with an amused smile as she jibed, "Are you not afraid of that girl getting mad at you? If worse comes to worst, I'll just have to let her beat me up," Qian Ping'an replied with a bright smile. The sword spirit tapped a finger against Qian Ping'an's forehead as she sighed. "You're all grown up now. I have, haven't I?" Qian Ping'an replied with a pleased expression as he reached out with one hand to compare their heights. She gently bumped Qian Ping'an's shoulder with her own as she smiled and asked, "You really like that girl, don't you? How much do you like her?" A faint blush appeared on Qian Ping'an's pale face as he cast his gaze into the distance and replied in an embarrassed manner, "I can't tell you that." "Oh my goodness, I'm about to get jealous." The sword spirit chuckled. "You wouldn't do that," Qian Ping'an said with a shake of his head. "You're the best, big sister immortal." The sword spirit smiled as she rose to her feet, then said, "Let's go fetch the umbrella from the medicinal shop. By the way, that body on the ground is Du Mao's young soul avatar, so I suggest you take it. It belongs to a 12th tier immortal, and you can sell it for a lot of money." Qian Ping'an took a reluctant glance at the body on the ground. The sword spirit smiled as she continued, "Even if you don't sell it, someone else can occupy it," such as Cui Chan. Qian Ping'an stowed the body into his minimization treasure. Even though his acupoints had been severely ravaged, he was still able to move just fine. However, he wasn't going to be able to do battle anytime soon, and at the moment, his powers were most likely inferior to back when he had first reached the 3rd tier. Qian Ping'an rose to his feet and looked down at his tattered golden sweet wine robe with a pained expression. The sword spirit was carrying the 3 pieces of dragon-slaying platform that had fallen out of the jade tablet minimization treasure, and she smiled as she consoled, "It's all right, you can mend it, and it'll only cost you a few pouches of gold essence copper coins. Perhaps you'll even be able to elevate it to become a pseudo-celestial tool. Old man Yang has to chip in some money, and do whatever his name has to as well, whether he likes it or not." Qian Ping'an nodded in response. She strode forward within the huge hole that had been blasted into the city wall as she said, "Don't be disheartened. The end of the Great Tao is still far away, and I'll still be by your side once you get there." Qian Ping'an hurriedly followed along, and she grabbed onto his shoulders before leaping out of the hole in the city wall. From there, Qian Ping'an pointed out the direction to the dust medicinal shop, and she set off through the air. The restrictions placed on Old Dragon City by the scholarly sage were still in place, so everything was still frozen in time. Outside the medicinal shop, Pei Qian was pacing back and forth with her hiking pole in her hand like a cat on a hot tin roof. After she had finished unleashing her deranged demon sword techniques, she discovered that the Yin soul with the Zhao surname was standing completely still on the spot like a wooden figure, and no matter how she called out to him, he displayed no reaction. It was as if the black smoke rising up from his body had been frozen solid, and she was unable to move it even after grabbing onto it and tugging with both hands. In the end, she threw her hiking pole aside and crouched down onto the ground to sob into her own arms. After her tears dried, she rushed out of the alley as quickly as she could. But right as she was about to run out onto the street, she recalled Qian Ping'an's warning for her to stay in the medicinal shop, and she didn't know what to do. In the end, she began sobbing once again while calling out for Qian Ping'an, and after she was too tired to cry any longer, she pulled out the talisman that Qian Ping'an had given her before slapping it onto her own forehead. Emboldened by the talisman, she finally made up her mind to step out onto the street to look for Qian Ping'an. Right at this moment, a familiar voice rang out from behind her. Pei Qian turned around to discover Qian Ping'an standing behind her, and she was immediately overcome by a wave of emotions, grinning through her sobs as she rushed over to Qian Ping'an before wrapping her arms around him while the sword spirit looked on with an intrigued expression. Given her powers and her vast wealth of experience, she was naturally able to immediately tell that there was something very special about Pei Qian's eyes. She could see that they contained the sun and the moon, Of course, they weren't the sun and moon of majestic world, but the essence of the celestial bodies of a certain blessed land. Even so, this was an enormous blessing that would be too much to bear even for a 9th-tier martial artist or an earth immortal. However, the sword spirit didn't really care to know how Pei Qian was able to accept such a tremendous blessing, while remaining completely unscathed. She had seen far too many extraordinary people, to the point that she had already become desensitized to the extraordinary, and she had already lost count of how many such extraordinary figures had perished to her old blade. Only after letting go of Qian Ping'an did Pei Qian spot the white-robed woman standing behind him, and her eyes widened as a dazed look appeared on her face. It's rare to see such a pure martial fortune prodigy nowadays. Why don't you teach her martial arts? The sword spirit asked with a smile. Qian Ping'an patted Pei Qian's head as he replied. In the past, I was worried that she would cause trouble if she learned martial arts, but from now on, I'll begin teaching her. Pei Qian began to slowly back away. It was a completely reflexive movement, and even she wasn't aware that she was doing it. The sword spirit's eyes narrowed slightly as she mused. Looks like it's not the ordinary blessed land newly discovered by the Confucian sect. Perhaps it's one of the ones that I cut down into the mortal world? Qian Ping'an had no idea what she was talking about. The sword spirit smiled as she assured. You don't need to know about this stuff for now. It's all ancient history, and just the thought of it makes me want to roll my eyes. After that, she turned and made her way toward the medicinal shop, and only then did Pei Qian snap back to her senses before timidly ducking behind Qian Ping'an. The oil paper umbrella that had been referred to by the old Taoist priest from the East Sea as the parasol leaf umbrella was leaning against the doorframe. She bent down to pick it up, and as soon as she opened the umbrella, the jade tablet from the ancestral Hall of Peace and Tranquility Mountain fell out. She took a glance at it, then crushed it into powder in a disdainful manner. Qian Ping'an stomped his foot in agitation and yelled, Hey! I have to return that thing to Peace and Tranquility Mountain. You should have said so earlier, the sword spirit said with a smile. It's all right, just tell them that I broke it, and if they want compensation, then they can come and find me in Jewel Small World. Forget it, Qian Ping'an sighed in a resigned manner. I'll write a letter to the old Heavenly Lord of Peace and Tranquility Mountain, and it should be fine. The sword spirit raised the umbrella above her head as she said, All right, I'm going now. Qian Ping'an still had so many things that he wanted to say to her, but he didn't know where to begin, and in the end, he only smiled and nodded in response. The sword spirit strode over to him, then bent down to gently press her forehead against his as she said in a gentle voice, Qian Ping'an, how fortunate I am to have met you. After that, she sped away as a streak of white light, breaking through the heavens of Old Dragon City and the sea of clouds up above. She paused momentarily in midair before flying back to the dragon-slaying platform in Jewel Small World. At the entrance of the medicinal shop, Pei Qian tugged on Qian Ping'an's sleeve in a fearful manner as she said, That big sister is the most powerful immortal I've ever seen. I didn't even dare to try and flatter her to her face. Qian Ping'an smiled as he said, No matter how high you climb, there will always be someone above you. Make sure to be humble and diligent in your martial arts practice. Pei Qian nodded firmly in response, then suddenly asked, That's the girl that you like, right? Should I call her mother next time I see her? Qian Ping'an was in the process of stepping over the doorstep, and he almost fell flat on his face upon hearing this. It would be great to have a mother like her. Pei Qian continued in an excited manner. Qian Ping'an hurriedly swung around and clasped a hand over her mouth as he scolded in a stern voice. Don't go around spouting nonsense. Pei Qian looked back at him with a perplexed expression as she asked, In that case, should I just think it and not say it? Qian Ping'an's expression darkened even further as he grabbed her by the earlobe, and Pei Qian was forced to tilt her head to the side and yelp in pain as Qian Ping'an dragged her all the way to the backyard of the medicinal shop before letting go of her ear. Pei Qian crouched down as she massaged her sore ear, while Qian Ping'an made his way into Zheng Dafeng's room. Zheng Dafeng was lying on the bed, still in an unconscious state. Just like Qian Ping'an's, his injuries had only been temporarily suppressed. However, he was in far worse condition than Qian Ping'an. Qian Ping'an dragged a chair over to the side of the bed, then sat down onto it and stared blankly at Zheng Dafeng in the dimly lit room. Pei Qian snuck over to the entrance of the room, and upon seeing Qian Ping'an's forlorn figure, She hesitated momentarily before departing in silence. She sat down onto the staircase with her chin resting on her hands. She had never seen Qian Ping'an look so sad before, and as a result, she was also feeling a little sad as she blew on the yellow talisman plastered to her forehead. The talisman remained stuck to her forehead, refusing to go anywhere, just like her sorrow. Is this what it feels like to be grown up? All of a sudden, the flow of time in the southern region of Eastern Treasured Vile Continent returned to normal. However, aside from the Golden Core and nascent tier Earth immortals, no one was able to detect anything amiss. Moments later, some of the more shrewd individuals in Old Dragon City finally began to realize that something wasn't quite right. It was no surprise that Qian Ping'an was nowhere to be seen. After all, Du Mao's sword-devouring arc had just pierced through his abdomen and sent him crashing into the city wall. However, Du Mao and Zheng Dafeng had also gone missing, and that was rather difficult to explain. On top of that, there were also some other inexplicable events that had taken place. For example, the old maidservant from the Cloud Forest Zhang clan, who was supposed to have been the second most powerful figure in the entirety of Old Dragon City behind only Du Mao, had fallen to the ground in a completely unconscious state with blood flowing out of all of her orifices, injuries indicating that the foundation of her great Tao had sustained irreparable damage. Fu Qi hurriedly rushed down from the dragon's scaling platform, then crouched down beside the old maidservant with a grim expression, unable to make sense of what he was seeing. At the same time, he couldn't help but feel a little resentment toward Fan Junmao. If it wasn't for her, there was no way that he would have been completely oblivious to what had just transpired. After inspecting the old maidservant's condition, Fu Qi was shocked to discover that her bonded flying sword had been destroyed. However, he didn't reveal this to anyone, merely declaring that the old maidservant had suffered some injuries that had to be treated. Fu Nanhua cast his gaze toward the city wall, where Qian Ping'an was already nowhere to be seen, and he couldn't help but wonder if Qian Ping'an had died somewhere in the outer city, or if he had somehow managed to survive this ordeal. Fu Donghai and Fu Chunhua exchanged another glance with each other. The two of them were still not willing to give up their claim over the position of city lord just yet, and from that perspective, the condition that the old maidservant was in was certainly not good news. Should I send someone to look for Qian Ping'an and Zheng Dafeng? Fu Nanhua asked. Fu Qi shook his head in response. There's no point in doing that now. Our top priority is to find out exactly what happened and why Du Mao suddenly disappeared. Turn the carriage around. We'll enter the city from the southern gate as opposed to the eastern one. The most flabbergasted person of all was Du Yan, the direct lineal descendant of Du Mao. He was still standing atop the city wall, looking on with a dumbstruck expression, unable to think of where Du Mao could have possibly gone. Du Yan's wife was very mediocre when it came to cultivation aptitude, but she was much calmer than the golden courtier Du Yan, and she said, Ancestor Du Mao is a dominant force to be reckoned with even on Parasol Leaf Continent, so there's no way that anything could have happened to him on the tiny Eastern Treasured Vile Continent. All those who submit themselves to our Parasol Leaf sect will thrive, while those who oppose us will meet their demise. When that time comes, I'll be responsible for overseeing one of the routes, while you will become the leader of the Ding clan. In the future, the Fu clan and the Ding clan will be the only two major clans of Old Dragon City. The woman smiled in response. The Ding, Feng, and Ho clans had all sent out elders to intercept and kill Zheng Dafeng. This was a spur-of-the-moment arrangement made by the Fu clan. As a result, the three clans were caught completely off guard. If they had been given more time to prepare, then they would have set up 3 blockades, one outside the city, one in the outer city, and one in the inner city. That would have been a much more discreet way of doing things that wouldn't have left any traces behind. Instead, they had been forced to take a more rushed and disorganized approach. Previously, the 4 major clans had banded together to fight against the Fu clan, but after Sun Jiashu of the Sun clan and Du Yan of the Ding clan pledged their allegiance to the Fu clan, the Feng and Ho clans had no choice but to accept this arrangement and do whatever was asked of them by the Fu clan. Even if they were going to be reduced to servants of the Fu clan, that would at least be better than being completely eradicated altogether. The young man from the Feng clan who was the culprit behind all of this still hadn't realized that something had gone wrong, and he was still planning out the celebratory banquet that he was going to throw once he returned to the city. After a brief discussion between the decision-makers of the 3 clans, they decided to follow the Fu clan to the southern city gate. As for the elders behind them that had been sent out to intercept Zheng Dafeng, they would be given free rein for now, and it was presumed that they would return to the city once they had claimed Zheng Dafeng's head. Fan Junmao woke up atop the sea of clouds, and sure enough, her cultivation base had fallen to the golden core tier. However, not only was she not resentful at all, she burst into hearty laughter. She took a glance down at the route leading to the dragon scaling platform to discover that there were still some battles taking place. Her brows furrowed slightly upon seeing this, and she clasped one hand over her own heart, then extended the middle and index fingers of her other hand before pointing downward a few times. Several pillars of light descended from the sea of clouds, and due to the fact that she was drawing upon the power of the sea of clouds, these attacks from Fan Junmao weren't inferior to those of the average nascent tier cultivator. At this point, the elders of the Feng, Ho, and Ding clans had already suffered severe casualties, so there were only 5 or 6 of them left, and all of a sudden, their heads were pierced through by beams of light shooting down from above. Only one of the Fan clan's coach drivers still remained, while Lu Baixiang and Wei Xian were still alive as well. Lu Baixiang's entire body was drenched in blood, while Wei Xian was relatively more unscathed. As for Zhu Lian and Sui Yubian, they had fallen in battle. Lu Baixiang retrieved Sui Yubian's deep infatuation, then plunged the sword into the hearts of the fallen elders from the 3 clans one after another, and only after that did he enter the carriage. Inside Old Dragon City, the short old man who was still able to release his own soul out into the world even after time had been brought to a standstill was currently standing under a tree, chortling in such a gleeful fashion that tears were beginning to well up in his eyes. He hadn't laughed this hard in the past 1,000 years. That's what you get, Dumao, you old bastard. He had only embarked on a northbound trip for leisure and to go and meet a friend of his, and never had he thought that he would get to witness such a marvelous spectacle along the way. The old man was from Parasol Leaf Continent, yet he was vastly renowned in some medium and small cultivation sects on Eastern Treasured Vial Continent, particularly in the hearts of all of the celestial maidens of those sections. To them, he was known as Footlong Spear, and he was known to be extremely generous. He and a certain handsome chivalrous young man from the invincible Divine Fist sect often battled it out over certain celestial maidens while observing them through enchanted picture scrolls. Of course, they didn't engage in any actual battles. Instead, they fought over who could give the most money, and instead of paying in snowflake coins, they used lesser heat coins. After the old man's laughter subsided, a serious look appeared on his face as he declared to himself, "Today is a good day, so I can't be so stingy anymore. I have to really show my generosity and knock that guy down a peg. I can't let him keep strutting around like he's better than me. It's just a pity that something so tragic had to happen to celestial maiden Su Jia of Sunscorch Mountain. She was such a beautiful girl. I was planning to make a trip to Sunscorch Mountain to give her a treasure, but it looks like I won't get the chance to do that anymore. How unfortunate." Then there's also He Xiaoyang of Divine Edict sect. Why did she decide to leave Eastern Treasured Vial Continent all of a sudden? I wanted to go and see her for myself, even if it's only from afar. Inside Zheng Dafeng's room in the dust medicinal shop, Chen Ping'an remained seated on the chair by the side of the bed. He had heard that even if Zheng Dafeng could regain the ability to walk, he would be hunchback for the rest of his life. Thinking back to the time that they had spent together in Jewel's small world, there was one occasion where Zheng Dafeng had sat in front of the gate of the small town, watching the immortals entering the town as he exclaimed, "That woman just now had a pair of killer legs." At the time, Chen Ping'an had failed to understand the sexual innuendo that Zheng Dafeng had made, and he asked in a naive manner, "Is she a martial arts practitioner?" Back then, Zheng Dafeng was an 8th-tier martial artist, but now, "Zheng Dafeng, I've traveled very far and met many people, but out of all of them, you are the one who possesses the most courage and has gone the greatest lengths to uphold justice." "I'm sorry, I really am," Chen Ping'an said in a hoarse voice. At this moment, Zheng Dafeng was lying in a completely silent and still manner beneath his blood-soaked blankets. Out on the sea outside of the island ferry station of Old Dragon City, the young Taoist priest standing on the giant golden gourd had his hands extended outward with their palms facing up, and there was a pitiable look on his face as the scholarly sage lashed his palms over and over again with a tree branch. Tears were swimming in the young Taoist priest's eyes as he protested. "It's not my fault, Master Scholarly Sage. I didn't try to screw over Chan Ping'an this time. He was the one who decided to oppose Du Mao. I couldn't even foresee this through divination. Du Mao is a 12th tier qi refiner. You can't expect me to go to Old Dragon City to oppose him. I would be throwing my life away. It's not fair that you're targeting me. Ow! The more the young Taoist priest complained, the more enraged the scholarly sage became, and he began swinging his tree branch with even more force as he yelled, "You ungrateful little bastard! You were referring to me as your brother not so long ago, yet now you turn around and bite the hand that fed you. That old fart clearly isn't doing a very good job of teaching you right from wrong, so let me educate you in his stead. Dodge one more time and I'll hit your face. Stand still and extend your hands." The little Taoist priest had no choice but to oblige, extending his palms forward once again as he sobbed, "Master Scholarly Sage, if you keep this up, I'm going to complain to my master about you. He'll stand up for me, just like you're standing up for Chan Ping'an." "How dare you talk back to me?" the scholarly sage snapped. "You think I don't know what that old bastard is up to? It's exactly because you have such an incompetent master that you turned out this way. If I don't beat you into submission today, then I'll take on your surname." The young Taoist priest erupted into tears as he protested. "But Master Scholarly Sage, we share the same surname to begin with. Even if we're not from the same family, the two of us go way back, so please spare me of this physical punishment." The scholarly sage harumphed coldly as he tossed the tree branch aside, then scolded, "Don't go causing any more trouble after you move to Heavenly World. You think you're smarter than everyone else, and that's going to be your downfall." The Taoist priests in the White Jade capital are more free and unrestrained compared with the 12th tier cultivators of our majestic world, but that also means that they're not going to follow the rules. In fact, the last thing they want is to have to follow rules. The young Taoist priest sat down onto the golden gourd as he wiped the tears from his eyes, then began shaking his hands out with a pained expression as he asked, "Move to Heavenly World? But my master never said we were going there." "You don't know shit," the scholarly sage snapped. "You're the one who doesn't know shit." The young Taoist priest grumbled under his breath. He had thought that he had spoken too quietly for the scholarly sage to hear him, but that was clearly not the case as the scholarly sage immediately retrieved the branch that was drifting away on the surface of the sea. A look of despair appeared on the young Taoist priest's face as he stood up and extended his palms out, bracing himself for another beating. It was just an ordinary little branch, but in the hands of the scholarly sage, it was no less powerful than a sword immortals flying sword. The scholarly sage cast his gaze toward the southwest, then tossed the branch aside and gave the young Taoist priest a slap on the head as he grumbled, "Piss off. Don't go causing any more trouble from now on, you hear me?" The giant golden gourd drifted away into the distance, and all of a sudden, the young Taoist priest began wiggling his bottom at the scholarly sage in a provocative fashion while also sticking out his tongue and making a face. The scholarly sage lifted a finger, and the branch immediately flew up into the air to pierce into one of the young Taoist priest's butt cheeks with unerring accuracy. The young Taoist priest plucked out the branch and tossed it aside, then hopped up and down in pain as he hurriedly sped away atop his sword-nurturing gourd. As he did so, he wiped the tears from his face, then yelled in a furious voice, "How could you humiliate me? You're no brother of mine." The branch doubled back and pierced into his other butt cheek. Only after that did the scholarly sage let the young Taoist priest off the hook and departed toward the southwest. Before long, he crossed paths with a certain swordsman flying toward Old Dragon City, and he jumped up with a furious expression to slap the swordsman on the forehead. One slap wasn't enough either. He slapped the swordsman on the head over and over again as he yelled, "You useless piece of trash! I can excuse you for not saving little Chi because you were far away and didn't know what was happening in Jewel's small world. But what were you doing just now when your junior brother was about to be killed right under your nose? All you do is practice your sword techniques all day long. What's the fucking point? You screwed over little Ping'an twice already, do you know that? The first time was when your presence affected his mental state, and the second time was when you gave him that 12th tier demon core without considering any of the consequences. Little Ping'an came this close to dying because of you. Have you heard of Du Mao? He's a shameless ascension tier old fart, and he went after little Ping'an in person in Old Dragon City. Your junior brother is only a 5th tier martial artist right now. Yet Du Mao personally went after him, do you understand? He wasn't taking part in the Greatly Empire's plans on behalf of his sect or probing Divine Lord Yang. That's all bullshit. His goal was to kill little Ping'an. In the face of others, including that young Taoist priest and those 2 Confucian cultivators from earlier, the scholarly sage always made sure to rein in his temper a little, no matter how enraged he truly was. However, he wasn't holding back at all in the presence of this swordsman. The swordsman remained completely still, allowing the scholarly sage to slap him on the head over and over again without dodging or retaliating. The scholarly sage continued to slap him as he yelled, "Where were you all this time? You pissed off to who knows where. What a free-spirited man you are, huh, Zui? Qi Jingchun could never be like you. Nor could your junior brother. No one can be as free-spirited as you are. If you give so little of a crap about everyone else, then why don't you just fuck off and ascend?" Zui continued to stand still on the spot, taking the beating in silence. This was the first time he had ever seen his teacher so angry and disappointed. Zui had been by the scholarly sage's side back when the latter was forced to imprison himself in the forest of virtue, and even then, he had remained as cheerful as ever, completely unfazed by his circumstances. Even after his statues were removed from Confucian temples and smashed into pieces, he wasn't bothered at all. That wasn't just a cheerful act that he was putting on. Instead, he was truly unbothered by all of that, and Zui knew that his teacher wasn't the type of person who would put on a false cheerful facade for anyone. "What should I do, teacher?" Zui asked with a calm expression. "Oh, so you finally remember that I'm your teacher? You saw how I dealt with the mountain gods of Middle-earth divine continents 5 mountains all those years ago, didn't you? You have a sword, don't you? Go after him. Go fuck his mom. Do something." Zui nodded in response before flying away atop his flying sword, parting the sea with his tremendous sword chi along the way. Following the inexplicable disappearance of Du Mao, a peculiar period of tranquility descended upon the entirety of Old Dragon City. At least, that was what appeared to be the case on the surface. No one knew what had happened, but it was presumed that Du Mao had easily defeated Zheng Dafeng and Chan Ping'an, and even though he had gone missing, his authority was standing hanging over the entire city like the sea of clouds, making all of the 5 major clans feel very apprehensive and uneasy. After witnessing Du Mao's unfathomable immortal powers, some extremely significant events were made to appear completely trivial. Of course, for those that were directly involved, those events were far from trivialities. For example, the Fu clan had instructed the Ding, Feng, and Ho clans to send out their elders to intercept Zheng Dafeng and the others, and every single one of them had perished. According to a Dragon Gate tier scout who was fortunate enough to have survived, all 4 of Chan Ping'an's martial artist servants displayed incredible combat prowess, and they didn't seem to fear death at all, often displaying no hesitation at all to strike down their opponents even at the cost of sustaining grievous injuries. 2 of them had perished, namely a beautiful woman wielding a sword, and a deranged old man who liked to tear people apart with his bare hands. After that, a series of pillars of light had suddenly descended out of the sea of clouds like the bonded flying swords of swordsmen, killing the rest of the 3 clans' elders. If it wasn't for that, they would have almost definitely been able to kill Chan Ping'an's 2 remaining servants. What was even more terrible news for the 3 clans was that following the battle, one of Chan Ping'an's 2 remaining servants had picked up the sword of his deceased female comrade and plunged it into the hearts of the fallen elders one after another. After learning of this terrible news, the 3 clans hurriedly arranged a secret meeting. Du Yin was invited, but he didn't show up. Hence, everyone began to speculate about whether this was a separate plot that the Fu clan had hatched with Du Yin, one that used Zheng Dafeng as bait to lure out all of the 3 clans' most powerful elders before having them killed, thereby dealing an extremely heavy blow to the 3 clans at the lowest possible cost. The more they considered this notion, the more it made sense to them. Fu Qi was the lord of Old Dragon City and the leader of the Fu clan, yet for some reason, he had cast aside all of his pride, shamelessly surrendering halfway through what was supposed to be a battle to the death before leaving Zheng Dafeng to be picked off by Du Mao. On top of that, he had also put the Cloud Forest Zhang clan to shame with his unscrupulous actions. It seemed completely unreasonable that he would do something, and the only plausible explanation seemed to be that this was a plot against the 3 clans all along. If that was the case, then it seemed that the Fu clan's ambitions had been underestimated. and that they were determined to eliminate the three clans altogether. Of course, this was nothing more than an empty bluff, and all of the truly authoritative figures at the meeting remained silent, refusing to echo such a nonsensical sentiment. The true foundation of Old Dragon City had always laid in its wealth, rather than the powers of individual cultivators and martial artists. All of a sudden, a steward announced that Fu Nanhua had come to visit. Fu Nanhua had brought several servants with him, but he made his way into the meeting hall on his own, and he only delivered a very brief address before departing, barely even taking a moment to sit down. In the wake of Fu Nanhua's visit, everyone in the hall began to weigh up their options, trying to think of the best course of action. Fu Nanhua had been very brief and concise with his address, announcing that on top of the Cloud Forest Zhang clan, Parasol Leaf Sect had also forged an alliance with the Fu clan. On top of that, the Fu clan was going to take over all of the 4 intercontinental ships that traveled to Stalactite Mountain that were currently outside of the Fu clan's control. The 3 clans were going to offer up 30% of their annual profits to the Fu clan from here onward as rent, for them to continue to remain in Old Dragon City. Of course, from here onward, the Fu clan was going to borrow the power of its new allies to embark on a northward expansion, conquering all of the mortal empires, immortal sects and clans, and martial arts powers along the way. All significant powers outside of Old Dragon City were going to be oppressed and eventually eliminated, and this was naturally going to present a massive number of opportunities. Perhaps the Ding, Feng, and Ho clans would be able to profit immensely and reach even greater heights, or perhaps they would fall into unprecedented lows, unable to even afford paying the rent required to remain in Old Dragon City. As for which of those outcomes would eventually come to pass, that would depend on whether the 3 clans would be able to capitalize on the opportunities that came their way. After declaring all of this, Fu Nanhua had left without another word, leaving the decision-makers of the 3 clans to continue their meeting. An elderly man present in the room smiled as he said, "Risk and reward have always come hand in hand. I think we should take a gamble." Someone else smiled and said, "The Great Li Empire's army is about to reach the central region of our eastern treasured vile continent, right? If our northward expansion proves to be successful, I wonder if we'll clash against those northern savages." A self-deprecating look appeared on an old woman's face as she sighed. "The Fu clan is planning to use us as dogs to bite their opposers. Having said that, if we can bite off a few chunks of good flesh, then we'll be able to profit immensely, so this is indeed an opportunity for all of us." The youngest person in the room was a man with a rather unremarkable appearance, but a unique aura that commanded attention and respect, and even though he was surrounded by a bunch of shrewd old foxes, he was clearly still able to hold his own. He interlaced his fingers behind his head and looked up at a lantern overhead as he murmured, "No matter how we try to spin it, we're completely at the mercy of the Fu clan." At the Dust Medicinal Shop, the Fan clan had spent a huge sum of money to hire several exceptional doctors, most of whom were cultivators who were followers of medicinism or Taoist cultivators who excelled in the field of medicine, and they were all busy at work. Meanwhile, a chaotic argument was unfolding in the Fan clan's ancestral hall, and what had initially been constructive criticism directed toward the clan leader was gradually turning into blatant accusations. In the end, many of the clan's elders broke down into tears, howling about how they were letting down their ancestors, and having such a clan leader was the misfortune of the entire clan. The reason for their despair was that the leader of the Fan clan had chosen a path that, in their eyes, was going to lead to the clan's demise. In their eyes, it was utterly inexplicable that he would choose to oppose the Fu clan at a time and try to protect Zheng Dafeng, who had already been reduced to a cripple. In the face of all of these accusations, Fan Junmao and the leader of the Fan clan merely sipped on tea in silence. Over at the medicinal shop, Zheng Dafeng had already woken up and was able to speak. Aside from the treatment that he was receiving from the doctors hired by the Fan clan, his recovery was also being aided by some of the things that the Zhao clan Insol had brought with him from Jewel's small world. Thanks to their combined efforts, the holes in Zheng Dafeng's soul were mended, so his condition didn't rapidly deteriorate. Zheng Dafeng didn't wallow in despair. Even though he didn't speak much, he appeared to be quite relaxed. Occasionally, Pei Qian would come to visit him in his room, and he would have a chat with her, seemingly in decently high spirits. She would always squat down on the ground, using a stool as a table so that she could make her daily transcriptions. The act of talking irritated Zheng Dafeng's wounds, so it hurt him very much to speak, but he was always happy to speak to Pei Qian. However, Pei Qian wasn't grateful for this at all. She was always very focused on her work while making her transcriptions, and if Zheng Dafeng were to say too much, then she would complain, saying something along the lines of, "Can you be quiet? If I accidentally mess up even a single character, my father will make me copy the whole passage again." Zheng Dafeng would always chuckle at this, but his chuckles would be very short-lived as he would immediately grimace and sweat profusely from the agony that followed. However, the presence of Pei Qian never failed to put him in a good mood. Qian Ping'an would also occasionally come to visit Zheng Dafeng, but due to the fact that both of them had sustained severe injuries, there would never be much conversation between them. On this day, at around dusk, Qian Ping'an left Zheng Dafeng's room and made his way out into the courtyard. Julian was busy cooking up a meal, while Pei Qian was practicing her deranged demon sword techniques. A table had been placed in the courtyard, and Lu Baixiang and Sui Yubian were playing a game of Go, while Wei Xian stood beside the table to spectate. He still didn't understand the game, but he would patiently wait for the outcome. Both Julian and Sui Yubian had perished outside Old Dragon City, so Qian Ping'an had to spend 2 more gold essence copper coins to resurrect them. According to the rule established by the old Taoist priest from the East Sea, Julian's ceiling was capped at the 10th tier due to the demise that he had suffered. As for Sui Yubian, she was in an even worse position. She had already died twice outside the rundown temple, and on this occasion, she had sacrificed herself to take down an enemy golden core tier cultivator. As a result, her ceiling was capped at the 9th tier. Regardless of how Qian Ping'an and the 4 martial artists from the picture scrolls felt about the abbot of the Observing Tao Temple, none of them could deny that he possessed unfathomable powers. On this day, the Zhao clan Yin soul was nowhere to be seen. As a nascent tier Yin soul, he possessed unpolished jade tier power in the medicinal shop, so everyone had thought that he would be the decisive piece that would ultimately turn the tables, but in an ironic twist of fate, he turned out to be the most useless one of all, doing nothing the entire time. Qian Ping'an had sustained severe injuries, Zheng Dafeng had been reduced to a cripple, while Julian and Sui Yubian had perished altogether. Even though Lu Baixiang and Wei Xian had survived, it was only just barely by the skin of their teeth. In contrast, all the Yin soul did was chat briefly with Pei Qian at the entrance of the medicinal shop, following which he was completely frozen in time. By the time the flow of time was restored, everything was already over. Qian Ping'an strode over to the doorstep of the medicinal shop before taking a seat. Inside the courtyard, Pei Qian was holding onto her hiking pole with both hands, panting heavily as she asked, "What do you think of my swordsmanship, old man Wei?" Wei Xian's gaze was focused on the Go board in front of him. In his eyes, the game was much more difficult to understand than a strategic simulation of 2 armies doing battle, and he replied to Pei Qian's question in an half-hearted manner, "Great." Pei Qian wasn't very pleased and she raised her voice as she asked, "How great is it?" "Invincible," Wei Xian replied. Pei Qian was furious to hear this and she snapped, "Do you take me for an idiot, old man Wei? Who would believe that?" "Do you believe it then?" Wei Xian asked as he took a glance at Pei Qian out of the corner of his eye. A smile immediately broke through Pei Qian's furious expression as she replied, "A little." With that boost in confidence from Wei Xian's praise, she raised her hiking pole and pointed it at Lu Baixiang as she asked, "Little Bai, are you going to save your energy and surrender right now? Or are you going to stay seated and fight me from where you are?" "I surrender." Lu Baixiang chuckled with his back facing Pei Qian. Pei Qian then turned to Sui Yubian as she asked, "Big sister Sui, I may only be less than 10 years old, but are you willing to face me in a fair and square battle?" "I'll pass," Sui Yubian replied in an indifferent manner. Pei Qian turned to the kitchen as she raised her voice even further and yelled, "You're the only one left, Julian. Your cooking skills may be unmatched, but don't expect me to go easy on you because of that. Come out and face me." "I'm too scared," Julian exclaimed with an apron around his waist and a spatula in his hand. Pei Qian raised her hiking pole up high as she declared triumphantly, "As expected, no one can defeat me aside from my father. I'm suddenly feeling a little lonely. Looks like I won't have to practice my sword techniques tomorrow." Qian Ping'an had moved his bench over to take a seat in the courtyard, and he smiled as he said, "You have to keep your efforts consistent. Pei Qian skipped over to Qian Pingan's side, then sat down as she asked with an expectant expression, "Am I your first ever disciple, master?" Qian Pingan smiled as he replied, "I have an unofficial disciple by the name of Cui Dongshan. Right now, he's at Mountain Cliff Academy in the Great Sui Empire, so if you want to take his place as my most senior disciple, then you'll have to ask his permission." Having said that, he doesn't seem to enjoy being referred to as senior brother very much, so I think there's a good chance that he'll agree. Gui Dongshan? I can tell just from his name that he's nothing more than a piece of small fry, Pei Qian scoffed. Once I meet him, I'll tell him to call me his senior sister, and he can be my junior brother. Rest assured, master, I won't bully him just because I am higher up than him in seniority, nor will I bribe him into conceding his position as my senior brother. A peculiar smile appeared on Qian Pingan's face as he said, "Sure, you can give it a try." Right at this moment, the Zhao clan Insol appeared at the entrance of the medicinal shop, and he said, "Qian Pingan, I have something that I need to speak to you about." Qian Pingan stood up and made his way into the medicinal shop. The Insol led him out of the front entrance and into the alley outside. Somehow he was able to use the formation to transform himself into the equivalent of an unpolished jade-tier cultivator presiding over a small world, and the light in the alley became very dim. Even though his facial features were rather blurry, Qian Pingan could still clearly sense how timid and uneasy he was, emotions that he had rarely ever seen the Insol display. After isolating this area from the outside world to keep out prying eyes, he hovered in front of Qian Pingan as he said, "An old Confucian scholar who claims to have had ties with Qi Jingchun approached me recently. Well, to put it more accurately, he abducted me out of the blue and he told me that you're unofficial teacher." An amused look appeared on the Insol's face here, but he didn't dare to laugh. He had only ever heard of the concept of unofficial disciples, and never had he heard of an unofficial teacher before. Respecting one's teacher was a golden edict that was not to be trodden upon lightly in Majestic World, and anyone who crossed this line often found themselves suffering severe consequences far worse than just having their reputation ruined. Qian Pingan nodded in response, refusing to elaborate any further. The Insol didn't try to pry any further, just like Qian Pingan had never asked him which branch of the Zhao clan in Jewel's small world he was an ancestor of. "The old gentleman told me to tell you to stay in Old Dragon City until at least the end of the year. He said that he had some things that he was going to bring to you later, and that you can go wherever you want come next spring," the Insol continued. "Sure," Qian Pingan replied with a smile. He then hesitated momentarily before asking, "Is Senior Yang really just going to ignore what happened to Zheng Dafeng?" The Insol was normally very reluctant to discuss any matters regarding the old Divine Lord, but after some hesitation, he made an exception on this occasion, replying, "The old Divine Lord sees further than us all, so he might appear rather cold and callous from our perspectives. If I can be so brave as to comment on his relationship with Li Er and Zheng Dafeng, even though the two of them are only his disciples in name, and he doesn't actually instruct them directly, I still think that he treats them far differently than he does everyone else." "I think so as well," Qian Pingan replied with a nod. Even though Zheng Dafeng has lost his martial arts cultivation base, his mental state still appears to be in a good place, so we don't have to be overly concerned. If all of us walk around with pity and sympathy in our eyes, that's only going to annoy him, the Insol continued. "I'm aware of that," Qian Pingan replied with a smile. "I'm sure you are. In fact, you've done very well in this regard," the Insol praised. Qian Pingan hurriedly waved his hands as he asked, "What's going on? Could it be that everyone that arrives in the dust medicinal shop develops a habit of sucking up to others?" The Insol burst into laughter before vanishing from the spot, and the surrounding formation also faded away, upon which Qian Pingan spotted Fan Junmao at the intersection between the alley and the street outside. Qian Pingan didn't know why she had decided to help Lu Baixiang and Wei Xian at the end of the battle against the elders from the three clans. Was it because she no longer regarded Du Mao as a threat, so she had swooped in to try and appease the dust medicinal shop? That didn't seem like something she would do. Fan Junmao made her way into the alley, then tossed a wine flagon at Qian Pingan as she said, "I've carried out basic refinement on the old flood dragon's golden core, and it's inside this flagon. You and Zheng Dafeng both need this right now. It's going to hurt a lot, But make sure to take a few sips of this wine every day. And it'll help you recover from your injuries better than any pills or elixirs could. Wine brewed from basic refinement of a 12th tier Great Demon's demon core would be too strong, and it'd probably kill you in your current state, while wine brewed from a golden core tier demon wouldn't be strong enough, so this wine is the perfect middle ground. I'll accept this wine, but you're a business person, so I'm sure you want something in return for it, right? Chen Ping'an asked. Fan Junmao shook her head in response. This is part of our Fan clan's compensation to the dust medicinal shop, so you don't need to repay me. A resigned look appeared on Chen Ping'an's face as he said, honestly, after hearing that explanation, I'm a little scared to accept such a precious gift from you. Then what if I were to tell you that our Fan clan also repaid your debt of 50 grain rain coins to Green Goat Palace on the Heavenly Palace Peak? Fan Junmao sneered. Why are you doing all of this? Chen Ping'an asked. Fan Junmao was silent for a moment as she sized up Chen Ping'an, then replied, you had a hole punched into your body by a bonded celestial weapon of an Ascension tier cultivator, but you had someone to save you, so it's no surprise that you didn't die. What's remarkable is that you're able to walk around just fine so soon after sustaining such a grievous wound, and that tells me you have an extremely solid martial arts foundation. Hence, as the one who calls the shots in the Fan clan behind the scenes, I have an excuse to bet on you, and I fully intend to place a massive bet on you. Chen Ping'an, your true qi circulation has been getting more and more difficult of late, right? On top of that, your golden sweet wine robe currently resembles a thatched hut that's full of holes. As your true qi wanes, more and more spiritual energy is going to be funneled into your acupoints. And not only will your martial arts cultivation base plummet as a result, even your bridge of immortality could collapse. So how about it? Are you willing to take a gamble as well? Fan Junmao pointed up at the sea of clouds overhead as she said, you wanted to refine a water attribute bonded item, right? Seeing as you've already secured an appropriate mantra, a cauldron, and a sufficient amount of materials, you've already satisfied all of the human conditions, so all I have to do is fulfill the timing and environmental conditions for you. Once you successfully refine a bonded item, you'll have an acupoint in your body that can store the spiritual energy of heaven and earth, so you won't have to expend your true qi on completely pointless wars of attrition. Hence, you'll be killing two birds with one stone. What do you think? If I'm not mistaken, you definitely know one of those two people, right? Chen Ping'an suddenly asked. Fan Junmao didn't deny this, and she raised an eyebrow as she asked, you refer to her as a person? Chen Ping'an offered no response to this. All of a sudden, it was as if a shadow had been cast over Fan Junmao's face, and her beautiful eyes resembled a pair of bottomless pitch-black wells as she said, you are completely unworthy of her. She had used 3 consecutive completely's to emphasize her point. Are you the one who gets to decide that? Chen Ping'an asked with a smile. Fan Junmao had no response to this, and she could only fume in silence. It was clear that she didn't have the best temper, so Chen Ping'an didn't try to provoke her any further. Is Fan Air all right? Fan Junmao couldn't help but roll her eyes at the mention of Fan Air, and she replied, he's completely lost his soul. He's been forced to stay in the manor, and all he does all day is dig around in the yard with his little pickaxe. He's already saved up over 10 sacks of dirt, saying that he's saving them in case of an emergency. Both his mother and my mother are very sympathetic of him, but they don't know how to convince him to snap out of it. A faint smile appeared on Chen Ping'an's face upon hearing this. Regardless of how rotten a place Old Dragon City became, as long as Fan Air was still here, Chen Ping'an would always come back to visit. Prior to her departure, a grim look appeared on Fan Junmao's face as she said, Parasol Leaf Sect is likely going to suffer extremely severe consequences for their actions. You reap what you sow. If you're going to be so arrogant and unreasonable, then you better pray to the heavens that you don't run into anyone that can beat you into submission. If you do, then resign yourself to your fate and accept the beating that's coming to you. If you get beaten to death, then reincarnate and try again in the next life, Chen Ping'an said with a cold look in his eyes. In that instant, Fan Junmao felt as if she were getting to know Chen Ping'an again for the first time. There was a lion peak that was presided over by a nascent tier earth immortal on Northern Complete Reed Continent. There were countless swordsmen on Northern Complete Reed Continent, and power was championed above all else there. It was often the case that all it would take for a conflict to erupt was random eye contact. People also often adopted false identities to attack enemy sects. It was essentially a hit and run where they caused as much damage as possible before fleeing the scene. The victimized sects would have their ancestral halls destroyed, and they wouldn't even know who had attacked them. After that, they would vent their fury by attacking some of the smaller nearby sects, thereby resulting in a vicious cycle. That was the extreme nature of a place like Northern Complete Reed Continent. Otherwise, it wouldn't have forcibly taken the North character from the much more deserving pure white continent when it was actually situated in the Northeast instead. Things only began to improve after a sage from Great Cormorant Academy intervened to teach 3 cultivators, namely 2 nascent tier cultivators and an unpolished jade tier 1, a lesson. After that, he declared that all of the swordsmen on the continent were to refrain from oppressing those weaker than them, and everyone became much more restrained thereafter. The entirety of Lion Peak had witnessed Li Lu entering the restricted area inaccessible, even to Earth immortals before emerging with a golden lion seal, having also reached the middle 5 tiers in the process. In the wake of that event, they had all realized that Li Lu was no ordinary woman, and as time passed, her status among cultivators had only continued to elevate, to the point that she was currently regarded to be only second in importance to the Old Mountain Master. Even the sage from Great Cormorant Academy always treated Li Lu with a great deal of respect in private, affording her even more respect than the average cultivator did. Li Lu's mother had opened a shop in the small town at the foot of the mountain, and she was the only one who was still in the dark, thinking that her daughter had been extremely fortunate to have been accepted as a disciple by one of the more mediocre immortals on Lion Peak. She also asked many questions about this arrangement, fearing that it was some old pervert who lusted after Li Lu, and only declared that he was going to accept her as his disciple in order to take advantage of her. She was worried that Li Lu's prime years would be wasted, and that once she was too old, there would no longer be any handsome and wealthy men willing to take her. Her worst fear was that she would be forced to resort to finding a husband for Li Lu in the town. She was beginning to regret not being more shameless and asking that young man with the Situ surname to accompany them for a year longer. If he had stayed, perhaps none of this would have even had to happen, and Li Lu would have been able to marry into a wealthy family to live a life of luxury and contentment. Once Li Huai was old enough, his mother would have sent him to live with Li Lu, and perhaps his brother-in-law would have been able to arrange him a well-paying job that also didn't require much work. She had already been running this shop for close to 2 years, and this had been a rather depressing time for her. She hadn't been able to earn much money, and she spent all day worrying about whether Li Huai was being bullied at Mountain Cliff Academy, or whether Li Lu would come down from Lion Peak one day, looking no longer as gorgeous as she did in the past. Whenever Li Lu made a trip down the mountain, she would always help out at her mother's shop and stay with her parents for a few days. Everyone on Lion Peak had received stern orders from the Old Mountain Master prohibiting them from approaching this shop, and anyone discovered to have broken this rule would be instantly executed on the spot. Hence, even to this day, Li Lu's mother was still completely unaware that her daughter was being worshipped like a bodhisattva on Lion Peak, rather than just some lowly maidservant taking care of an immortal's daily needs. Li Lu had just returned from a journey recently, and on this day she was in the shop, massaging her mother's shoulders while listening to her gossip about the other households in the town. Li Er was squatting down by the entrance of the shop, basking in the late winter sun, and the more the woman looked at him, the more agitated she felt. What a good-for-nothing idiot. When it came to other men in the town, even if they were hideous in appearance, their wives would still sob and complain about how their husbands were cheating on them with some vixens behind their backs. In contrast, she had no such concerns with Li Er, and while that was a good thing, it made him seem like even more of a coward. If Li Er really were to have an affair, then she had decided that she was going to chop off Li Er's third leg with a meat cleaver, then go and confront the other woman. However, she wouldn't dare to use her meat cleaver on outsiders. This was still a new and foreign place to her, and if she were to threaten someone in the town with a meat cleaver, then she would surely be ganged up on. She only ever dared to pick on those close to her, and Li Huai was very similar to her in this regard. In contrast with his wife, Li Er was actually enjoying the peaceful lifestyle here. This was the type of life that he had always been most accustomed to living. However, the 3 of them were on Northern Complete Reed Continent, While Li Huai had been left on his own at Mountain Cliff Academy on Eastern Treasured Vile Continent, and even though he never liked to speak about his sorrows, his son was still constantly on his mind. After massaging her mother, Li Lu carried 2 little stools outside, then sat down with Li Er. Chao Shi from Southern World Continent was serving as Li Lu's Dao guardian, and he had already been staying on Lion Peak for quite some time. Whenever he left the mountain, it would be to accompany Li Lu to various different secret areas or immortal sect heritage sites to pick up treasures. Pick up were the operative words here. Chao Shi didn't have to do anything aside from watch as Li Lu made one bountiful return after another. Now that they had returned to Lion Peak, Chao Shi finally didn't have to accompany her to any more strange places, and he had gone on a journey of his own. At this moment, there was a golden lion seal strapped to Li Lu's waist along with a short sword, both of which had already had concealment restrictions placed upon them so that they were invisible to those below the nascent tier. All of a sudden, Li Lu turned her gaze to Li Er, and their eyes met briefly, upon which Li Er stood up and said that he was going for a walk, while Li Lu returned to the room to chat with her mother. "You're finally moving from that spot," his wife scoffed. "If you have some backbone, then go out and bring back a woman. I may even share you with her." Li Er sped up and walked away even faster. His wife rolled her eyes at Li Lu as she complained, "I must have truly been blind to have married your father. Back then, there were so many handsome lads in the town pining for my hand in marriage. I don't know what I saw in your father. But if you didn't marry my father, how could you have had my brother?" Li Lu asked with a gentle smile. The woman poked Li Lu on the forehead as she harumphed coldly. "Li Huai has always been a very good boy growing up, but you're completely different. You're his big sister, yet you don't care about him at all. Why did you insist on coming here to learn immortal techniques or whatever? You're such a stupid girl. How could you possibly learn something so difficult? Time flies in the immortal world. 3 or 5 years is nothing more than the blink of an eye for them, and by then you'll already be an old woman. Who would be willing to marry you then? Not only will they offer less of a betrothal gift, I'll have to dig into the money that I set aside for your brother's marriage. How could you be so selfish?" As usual, Li Lu's mother was being ridiculously sexist, but Li Lu wasn't bothered, and her smile remained unchanged as she said, "I get an allowance every month for cultivating on Lion Peak, and I'm saving it all for Li Huai so his future wife won't dare to look down on him." The woman was ecstatic to hear this, following which a furious look appeared on her face as she snapped, "Why didn't you tell me that earlier? Hurry up and hand over the money. What if some sweet-talking scoundrel scams you of your money? What'll become of Li Huai then? I have to keep that money safe for you." Li Lu pulled out a pouch that contained 30 or so taels of silver as she said, "There's actually more that I left behind on Lion Peak." The woman hurriedly stowed the pouch of silver away, and in a rare display of compassion toward her daughter she said, "You can keep the rest for yourself. You need to have some money on your hands if you want to build good relations with the immortals on Lion Peak. That's something that even I understand. Go and tell all of your fellow disciples that they can get a discount when they come to my shop." Li Lu nodded obediently in response. Unbeknownst to her mother, the rest of her wealth would be considered staggering even in the eyes of all of the sword immortals on Southern World Continent. The woman was in a much better mood with this unexpected sum of money falling onto her lap, and she stroked Li Lu's delicate hand as she said, "Once you marry a good man, both your father and I will be able to heave a sigh of relief. Remember to try and marry into a wealthy family that can help your brother out." "All right," Li Lu replied in a gentle voice. As Li Er returned from his walk, there was a furious look on his face, an expression that he very rarely displayed. His wife was rather surprised to see this and she asked, "What happened? Did some woman yell at you for staring at her too much? How dare she? Who the hell does she think she is? Let me go see her." Li Er shook his head as he said, "Let's go talk in the backyard." Earlier, a flame had appeared in front of Li Er out of the blue, and he immediately scaled the mountain to find a secluded location on Lion Peak, then returned to the shop after hearing the message sent to him. Sitting at the table in the main room, the woman was becoming more and more uneasy. It was extremely rare to see Li Er. In fact, she could only recall one previous occasion where he had displayed such intense emotions. Normally, he was a complete coward who didn't even dare to raise his voice at any outsiders, but on that occasion, He told her that he was making a trip into the mountains to cut firewood and make charcoal. Only after a long time did he return from the mountains, but thankfully, he had brought back a lot of silver for his efforts. Li Lu sat down beside her mother, and right as Li Er was about to speak, she interjected. Did you receive a letter from our hometown? Li Er was no fool, and he could see what Li Lu was doing. He immediately nodded in response as he explained, my master sent me a letter, and I wanted to discuss the contents of the letter with you too. His wife gulped nervously, then asked, could it be that the old fart suddenly dropped dead and has no one to bury him, so he's making you go back to arrange his funeral? We're on a completely different continent right now. Can't we just send some money back and get the people from the Yang family's medicine shops to help out? What a pain in the arse that old fart is. He just had to choose the worst possible time to die, didn't he? We've only just grown accustomed to life here. And he's suddenly gone and kicked the bucket. If I could go back, I'd give him such an earful that he comes back to life. An amused smile appeared on Li Lu's face, while Li Er gawked at his wife for a long while with his mouth gaped wide open, and only after a long silence did he shake his head as he replied, Master is fine, but the same can't be said for Zheng Dafeng. That bastard's more shameless and resourceful than anyone I know. What could have possibly happened to him? The woman asked. Didn't he go to the south or something? What happened? Did he get beaten to death after trying to steal some woman's underwear? Li Er looked down at the table with a grim expression as he replied. He's not dead, but he was beaten into a cripple. His entire back was broken, and he's still bedridden as we speak. Even if he manages to stand up someday, he's never going to be able to straighten his back again. On top of that, he wasn't the perpetrator this time, it was someone else who targeted him. I asked Master if he was going to step in, and Master told me that it's not like he's Zheng Dafeng's father, so even if Zheng Dafeng dies, it's not any of his business. Li Lu's eyes narrowed slightly, while her mother was stunned into silence. Zheng Dafeng was indeed a massive pervert, and she was always saying that he was destined to be alone for the rest of his life, but he was not a bad person. Li Er cast his gaze toward his wife as he said, I want to go and visit Zheng Dafeng, but I don't know if you'll let me. Tears began to well up in the woman's eyes as she yelled, You're a heartless bastard if you don't go. The concern on Li Er's face instantly made way for a smile upon hearing this. Can you make sure that you come back unharmed? The woman asked in a careful manner. Leah nodded in response. If I can't beat them, then I'll just run away. Shouldn't be a problem. What? You're going to fight them? The woman asked in a concerned voice. Li Er hung his head with a conflicted expression, not wanting to lie to his wife. Li Lu hurriedly consoled. It'll be fine, mother. The place where Zheng Dafeng is right now is different from our hometown. As long as you're willing to pay and go to the authorities, they'll give you a fair ruling. It'll be a little expensive, but it avoids conflicts, isn't that right, father? Li Er hurriedly nodded in response, very grateful for how thoughtful his daughter was. The woman wiped her tears, then placed the pouch of silver that Li Lu had just given her onto the table. After that, she went into another room and rummaged through some stuff before pulling out another large pouch. This was virtually all of the money that they had aside from the money set aside for Li Huai's marriage, and after handing both pouches to Li Er, she said, Make sure to spend as little as possible on the way there so you can save as much as possible for the authorities. Li Er grabbed the 2 pouches before leaving the shop, telling Li Lu to look after her mother before he went. The woman sat in the courtyard in a daze for a long while, then sighed. Poor Dafeng. How is he ever going to find a wife now? After leaving the shop, Li Er went straight to the summit of Lion Peak, then went to the old nascent tier cultivator on the mountain to request a small boat. He was going to travel to a large ferry station, then make his way to Eastern Treasured Vile Continent from there. The old man didn't dare to ask any questions. Not only was Li Er the father of Lion Peak's reincarnated founder, he was also a 10th tier martial artist. At such close quarters, the old nascent tier cultivator knew that he was no match for Li Er. On top of that, he had always felt like people like Li Er were the most terrifying type of people imaginable. Under normal circumstances, they were far too easygoing. In fact, it was no exaggeration to call him a complete pushover. However, when he wasn't in the mood to be amicable and easygoing, then the flames of his wrath would be able to easily burn a hole straight through Lion Peak, so he was definitely not to be messed with. Li'er didn't turn down the offer, and he thanked the old man before riding the boat swiftly down the mountain, while the mountain master acted as his personal helmsman. On that secluded spot on the mountain summit, the flame had produced a cloud of smoke, clearly depicting Old Man Yang sitting in the backyard of the Yang family's medicine shop. After hearing about what had happened to Zheng Dafeng, Li'er had asked Old Man Yang if he could make a visit to Parasol Leaf Sect. Old Man Yang had told him that it was up to him, then swept a sleeve through the air to scatter the cloud of smoke. If it's up to me, then the decision is easy. Only after reaching the 10th tier did he come to realize that there was an entire new world waiting for him, and most importantly, he knew what path to take to traverse this new world as quickly as possible, thereby ensuring that it would be a smooth journey for him all the way until he reached the end of the road. He had heard that Du Mao had already been made to pay a very heavy price in Old Dragon City, losing both his bonded celestial weapon and his Yang Soul avatar, so at the very most, his cultivation base could only be at the immortal tier at the very highest at this point in time. On top of that, Old Man Yang had told Li'er that Parasol Leaf Sect's mountain protection formation wasn't all that impressive. Hence, if he could give Du Mao a suggestion, then it would be to go to the ancestral hall and pray to his ancestors. Otherwise, he may not get a chance to do so in the future. Qian Ping'an, Pei Qian, and Zheng Dafeng were all accustomed to hardships, so over the past few days, the atmosphere in the dust medicinal shop hadn't been gloomy at all. On the contrary, as Zheng Dafeng began to return to his normal joking self, things started to liven up in the shop. Fan Air had also been brought to the shop for a visit, and he met his Dao mentor Zheng Dafeng in his room. While entering the room, he was able to suppress his tears, but as soon as he caught sight of Zheng Dafeng, the floodgates were instantly opened. However, it was unclear what Zheng Dafeng had told him, but following their conversation, Fan Air emerged from the room with a faint smile on his face. Fan Junmao asked Qian Ping'an if he had made up his mind about whether he wanted to refine his bonded item on the Sea of Clouds, to which he had responded that he was still thinking about it. Fan Air wanted to spar with Qian Ping'an, assuring him that he would go easy on him, only to be immediately knocked down a peg by a slap to the head from Fan Junmao. Pei Qian saw this as her opportunity to shine, and she volunteered to engage the 4th-tier master martial artist, that was Fan Air, in a battle. Before long, Fan Air was being chased all over the courtyard, while Pei Qian ran after him, swinging her hiking pole through the air as she did so. While running away, Fan Air yelled, "How can you possess such unfathomable powers at such a young age? Could it be that you're a legendary prodigy? Allow me to go back and train diligently for 3 more days before I come back to challenge you again." Pei Qian was sweating profusely in the wake of her battle against Fan Air, and she felt like she had made a splendid display of her own powers. Indeed, true to the style of her deranged demon sword techniques, she had even given herself an inadvertent knock on the forehead with her hiking poke while chasing after Fan Air. Her sword techniques were simply too powerful. After Fan Air was grabbed by the collar and dragged out of the shop by Fan Junmao, Pei Qian turned to Wei Xian as she asked, "Old Man Wei, am I really that powerful now? I know that Fan Air was exaggerating his own powers." "Was he? Even if he was exaggerating, it wasn't by much," Wei Xian interjected while basking under the winter sun as he sat on a small stool. Pei Qian wiped the sweat from her face as she declared, "So I really am a legendary prodigy. I was a little unsure of myself before, but that settles it. After I finish my transcriptions tonight, I'm going to invent a set of fist techniques and teach them to you tomorrow. You don't have to thank me, just give me 10 Tonghulus as compensation." "I'm not going to learn your fist techniques," Wei Xian replied with a shake of his head. Pei Qian immediately rushed over to him with a furious look on her face as she asked, "Why? Are you looking down on me? Or are you unwilling to buy me Tonghulus?" "I'm willing to buy you Tonghulus, but I don't have any money left," Wei Xian replied. Pei Qian stomped a foot onto the ground in frustration as she grumbled, "How did you end up so poor that you don't even have enough money left to buy Tonghulus?" She then suddenly crouched down and whispered into Wei Xian's ear, "You still have that fancy imperial robe, don't you? How about we sell it in exchange for silver? If you get in trouble for it, I'll stick up for you. That's what friends are for, is it not? Then why don't you sell that talisman of yours?" Wei Xian countered. Pei Qian pulled out the yellow paper talisman before adhering it to her own forehead. and in a rare display of empathy and self-awareness she said, "You're right. I can't bear to part with this talisman, and the same must apply to you with that imperial robe, so I won't force you to sell it." "Oh? What's gotten into you all of a sudden?" Wei Xian asked as he turned to look at her with a surprised expression. Pei Qian looked around briefly to make sure that there wasn't anyone else nearby, then whispered into Wei Xian's ear, "I'm actually a princess and I lost my way one day and ended up far away from the palace. Back when I was younger, I had a golden stool to sit on, and I would toss food away for fun." "That sounds like my childhood," Wei Xian said with a nod. Not only was Qian Ping'an sleeping on the ground of the medicinal shop every day, he was also using the shop's counter as his desk. Recently, he had been repeatedly reading and pondering the pill refinement scripture bestowed upon him by Lu Yong of Azure Tiger Palace. At this point, the dust medicinal shop had become an unspoken restricted area in Old Dragon City, and the Zhao clan Insol was also guarding the alley outside, so Qian Ping'an felt it was safe to place the smallest of the 3 pieces of dragon-slaying platform onto the counter, along with that golden jade tablet with the words, "Nourishing the Noble Spirit," engraved upon it. The sword spirit hadn't gone into detail about where the jade tablet had come from. All she had told him was that a certain old geezer had been quite fair in his punishments, punishing the more severe offender by restricting them to the confines of the Confucian temple, while the lighter offender had this jade tablet taken away. Over the past few days, Qian Ping'an had been tossing a gold essence copper coin into the golden sweet wine robe virtually every single day, and this was already the 4th one. This was a vital matter that concerned his survival, so he couldn't afford to be stingy. As for the vials of seeded meditation pills, fire dragon pills, and rainbringer pills, Qian Ping'an had only taken a single seeded meditation pill, while the rest had all been given to Zheng Dafeng and the 4 picture scroll martial artists, leaving not even a single pill to spare. All of a sudden, Qian Ping'an recalled something, and he stood up and made his way out into the backyard. Sui Yubian was practicing her standing meditation when she was approached by Qian Ping'an, who asked her to help Pei Qian strengthen her bones and tendons in preparation for martial arts training. Pei Qian was ecstatic to hear this. She was finally going to officially become Qian Ping'an's most senior disciple. Sui Yubian nodded in response. However, Qian Ping'an had only just left the room when he heard Pei Qian erupting into tears, following which she rushed out of the room as quickly as she could while sobbing to Qian Ping'an about how she never wanted to learn martial arts again. Sui Yubian also emerged from the room with a resigned look on her face as she said, "I already held back a lot, but she can't bear even the slightest bit of pain." Qian Ping'an buried his face in the palm of his hand, too embarrassed to look at Sui Yubian. Pei Qian was still clinging onto him with all her might, and not only was she sniveling incessantly and sweating profusely, her little face was etched with horror, as if she had just endured something traumatic. Even before it was nighttime, Pei Qian approached Qian Ping'an at the counter of the medicinal shop, and told him that she had made a transcription of 1,000 characters. Even though she really had transcribed that many characters, she was still feeling very timid and uneasy. Qian Ping'an was both amused and exasperated as he said, "It's fine if you don't want to learn martial arts, there's no need to feel bad about it. Just put more effort into your studies from now on, and you can still achieve great things." Pei Qian skipped away joyfully upon hearing this, telling Qian Ping'an that she was going to chat with Wei Xian. Qian Ping'an smiled in response, then continued to read through the pill refinement scripture. All of a sudden, the image of Pei Qian standing at the intersection between the alley and the street outside the dust medicinal shop sprang into his mind. The helplessness that she had displayed at the time reminded him of a time when he had entered the mountains to gather medicine. As he was making his way back down from the mountains, he encountered a storm, and the influx of rainwater flooded the creek, blocking the shortest path down the mountain. Even though he was terrified, he still gritted his teeth and attempted to jump over the flooded path so that he could get back to his ill mother. With that in mind, Qian Ping'an felt a pang of sympathy in his heart. While it was true that even the sword spirit had proclaimed that Pei Qian was an exceptional martial arts prodigy, Qian Ping'an didn't feel like it was a waste or a pity that she didn't want to practice martial arts. She was still just a child, so it was only right that she behaved like one. Back when he was a child, he had also had moments where he had been envious of other children his age flying kites at the immortal tomb, or nibbling on snacks or wearing new clothes. At the time, he was but a small and powerless child, and he had no choice but to sell the things that his parents had left behind one by one just so that he could afford to buy rice, and each time he did so, he would cry himself to sleep in bed the same night. These hardships weren't necessarily bad things, and if they could be overcome, then they serve as valuable experiences to be cherished. Even so, Chen Ping'an still wanted the people that he cared about to be able to lead easier lives. At the very least, he didn't want them to have to face such hardships at too young an age. Having said that, in the face of the will of the heavens, the wishes and desires of any individuals were simply far too insignificant. Chen Ping'an rested his chin down onto the counter, feeling a little drowsy, and before long, he had fallen asleep. In Parasol Leaf Sect, no one had detected that anything was amiss aside from the few cultivators of the upper 5 tiers in the sect. Everyone else was still under the impression that their sect was the undisputed supreme force on Parasol Leaf Continent, and that even if Jade Tablet Sect, Planchette Writing Sect, and Peace and Tranquility Mountain were to combine their powers, they would only just barely be able to contend with Parasol Leaf Sect. Over the past few centuries, all of the disciples of the sect had been forbidden from revealing to any outsiders that Du Mao had already reached the Ascension tier. They were only allowed to proclaim that Du Mao was at the Immortal tier and had chances of reaching the Ascension tier. But in reality, this was already an open secret in the cultivation world of Parasol Leaf Continent. All of the prominent cultivators on the continent were already aware of Du Mao's cultivation base, and the only reason that they didn't mention it was that they were afraid doing so would draw the ire of Parasol Leaf Sect. Aside from Du Mao, Parasol Leaf Sect also had several unpolished Jade tier cultivators who also had resounding reputations. For example, the old ancestor who was responsible for overseeing the sect's genealogical records had just returned to the sect after successfully slaying a 12th tier great demon. On top of that, the current leader of Parasol Leaf Sect was not just an unpolished Jade tier chi refiner, but also a swordsman. The sect leader had also nurtured an exceptionally talented direct disciple, a swordsman that had reached the nascent tier at only 300 years of age. Given Parasol Leaf Sect's tremendous foundation of power, how could the Jade Tablet Sect even hope to compete with them? Parasol Leaf Sect's territory spanned hundreds of kilometers, so it was a grueling task for one to visit even a nearby acquaintance unless they were capable of flight. On top of that, the sect owned a Parasol Leaf small world that was only accessible to nascent tier Earth immortals and cultivators of the upper 5 tiers. However, one day, the supreme pride and confidence shared by all of Parasol Leaf Sect's disciples began to waver, and many of the things that they had previously taken for granted were suddenly stripped away. On that fateful night, almost all of the sect's cultivators of the middle and upper 5 tiers sensed a tremendous aura closing in from the north, bearing down upon Parasol Leaf Sect's northern border. Even before he showed himself, his sword chi had already arrived, and it crashed down upon the green barrier released by the sect's mountain protection formation. The barrier was instantly shattered, and even though a second parasol umbrella instantly took shape from the water and mountain fortune that had been accumulated at the cost of countless snowflake coins, it was also destroyed with a single sword strike. Each successive parasol umbrella that was conjured up was smaller than the last one, and only as the 6th one emerged did the nameless swordsman appear, hovering in midair over 100 kilometers away from Parasol Leaf Sect's ancestral mountain. "Come out, Du Mao. Otherwise, I can't guarantee that my 7th sword strike won't harm any innocent bystanders," he declared. In this instant, everyone in the southern region of Parasol Leaf Sect was staring blankly up at a piercing speck of light in the sky, while for those in the north, none of the chi refiners below the golden core tier even dared to set eyes upon the swordsman. Whenever they did, they would feel as if wisps of sword chi were piercing viciously into their eyes, forcing them to hurriedly lower their heads. Right at this moment, a new barrier appeared before the swordsman with the ancestral mountain at its center, and it was powered by the spiritual energy of Parasol Leaf's small world. This was the core of the sect's mountain protection formation, and it only encompassed an area with a radius of roughly 150 kilometers around the ancestral mountain, just large enough to keep the swordsman at bay. In reality, it wasn't keeping him out at all. He had already forced his way into his sect, and he could easily force his way in even deeper, but was merely choosing not to. The leader of Parasol Leaf Sect had an ancestral hall jade tablet strapped to his waist, allowing him to pass through the barrier, and he arrived before the swordsman before asking with a smile, "Am I speaking to sword immortals, Wu Yu?" "Are you Du Mao?" the swordsman asked. He then answered his own question. "It doesn't seem like it." Hence he lashed out. It was a battle between two sword immortals of the upper 5 tiers, but contrary to the expectations of Parasol Leaf Sect disciples, there was no lengthy, arduous battle. Battles between swordsmen generally reached their conclusions faster than battles between normal chi refiners to begin with, and on top of that, there was a massive disparity in power between the two combatants. Before long, the Parasol Leaf Sect leader had been struck down, and he plummeted straight through the barrier before crashing into a mountain, completely shattering the mountain summit. The swordsman then sliced a large opening into the barrier with a single swift slash of his sword, and he invited himself into the sect like a rude guest without any manners. Countless Parasol Leaf Sect disciples flared up with rage as a torrent of radiant immortal treasures were sent flying at him from all directions, but in the face of the tremendous sword chi surging out of Zhuoyu's body, none of the immortal treasures were even able to reach within 1,000 feet of him. Zhuoyu cast his gaze toward the ancestral mountain with a serious and earnest expression, as if he were a student that had come here to learn, and he declared, "My master told me to come and fuck your mother. I struggle when it comes to reading books, but this is not a difficult task for me to complete at all. Hence, I must ask you this, Du Mao. Is your mother still alive, and is she attractive?" Deathly silence ensued. After waiting for a moment, Du Mao still refused to show himself. Zhuoyu cast his gaze toward the ancestral mountain as he chuckled. "Still not coming out even after that? As expected of an Ascension tier cultivator, your face is so thick that even my flying sword most likely won't be able to pierce through it." At the same time, Zhuoyu suddenly noticed something strange. Halfway up the ancestral mountain stood an old unpolished jade tier cultivator beside a cluster of beautiful pavilions. It appeared that he was protecting a young woman with decent cultivation aptitude. At this moment, everyone was looking at her with peculiar expressions, and she was a very young Dragon Gate tier cultivator. Upon noticing Zhuoyu's gaze, she immediately lowered her head in a fearful manner. Zhuoyu's brows furrowed slightly upon seeing this. Many of the disciples of Parasol Leaf Sect had turned to the ancestral mountain in unison, and it seemed that all of them were looking for her. The old unpolished jade tier cultivator standing beside her was perhaps her Dao guardian, and appeared furious, but he didn't dare to stand up to Zhuoyu. The young woman had a very timid personality, and she began to quietly weep in the face of everyone's scrutiny. If a cultivating sect wanted to establish dominance over all other sects, then that was actually a very simple task to accomplish. The sect just had to have the most powerful cultivators. Currently, Parasol Leaf Sect also had the most powerful cultivators, allowing them to beat other opposing powers into submission, essentially giving the sect and its disciples an untouchable status. In the future, they also had to ensure that they had the most powerful cultivators to keep everyone else submissive. Otherwise, vengeance would come in swift and brutal fashion from all those that they had oppressed in the past. Revenge was a dish best served cold, and this was particularly true for cultivators, who had far longer lifespans than mortals. It was not unheard of for one to plot their vengeance over the course of centuries, even millennia. This reincarnated young woman was an unpolished jade tier cultivator in her previous life. It had taken close to 30 years of arduous searching for the sect to find her, and that was after a cultivator in the sect adept in the art of divination pointed out the general area. After that, another cultivator of the sect had waited for her for decades under a false alias, and several years after she was born, that cultivator was finally able to successfully bring her back to the sect after a grueling battle. There were high hopes placed on her shoulders, and she was expected to be one of the future leading figures of the sect. In terms of status, she was similar to Huang Ting of Peace and Tranquility Mountain. However, she didn't possess anywhere near the same cultivation base as Huang Ting, nor did she seem to have the innate, intangible properties required to go far on the path of cultivation. The old heavenly lord of Peace and Tranquility Mountain and sect leader Song Mao regularly scolded Huang Ting for always causing trouble, but internally, they were very pleased with her courageous and unyielding nature. As for this young woman, her cultivation aptitude was exceptional, but her personality was a little too soft. She had left the mountain to travel and hone her Dao heart on several past occasions, and upon her return, the appraisal that the sect gave her would always be full of glowing praise, but at the very end, there would always be a comment or two about how her personality was a little too timid and lacking in decisiveness. However, due to her special status, no one dared to actually criticize her, and the Du clan, the most prominent clan of Parasol Leaf Sect, treated her like their pride and joy. The reasons for this were twofold. First, during her previous life, she was an unpolished jade tier cultivator. Second, also during her previous life, she happened to be Du Mao's mother. Generally speaking, only extremely powerful cultivating sects and immortal clans would be able to pull off the miraculous feat of finding a past prominent figure in their reincarnated form. Suiyu faltered slightly upon seeing this, and with one hand holding his sword, he scratched his own head with the other, seemingly feeling a little guilty for scaring an innocent young woman. That was just a joke, don't take it seriously. It's more so a figure of speech. I'm not actually here to do anything to you, he explained. His explanation only made things worse, and the young woman's complexion instantly turned deathly pale upon hearing what he had to say. Her delicate little face began to pucker up, and there were still tear stains on her cheeks as she did everything in her power not to appear timid and fearful against this unreasonable man who had just barged into their sect. Otherwise, given her personality, she would have already been weeping profusely by now. Suiyu was left rueing his rather unfortunate choice of words, but he didn't want to explain anything. Little Qi was not very good at dealing with women, while Cui Dongshan was a little better in this regard. As for Suiyu, he had always felt like the heart of a woman was even more difficult to understand than his master's teachings. Essentially, it was something completely beyond him. Was Suiyu a learned individual? He was naturally severely lacking in this regard compared with Qi Jingchun and Cui Dongshan. He had never liked studying, and all of the books he had read had been forced upon him by the scholarly sage. However, he was still a very learned individual. At the very least, the average academy's noble or virtuous scholar wasn't even worthy of having an academic discussion with Suiyu. One had to realize that the earliest source of his sword qi had been derived from none other than books, as well countless cliff carvings and engraved plaques. Moreover, in order to support his training, Qi Jingchun had accompanied him on extensive journeys that spanned immeasurable distances. Suiyu heaved a faint sigh as he cast his gaze toward Middle-earth Divine Continent. As he withdrew his gaze, he discovered that there was an exceptionally talented young swordsman standing beside the young woman. The young man was glowering directly at Suiyu with a fierce and stubborn look in his eyes, and he was unwilling to turn away even as Suiyu's sword qi scorched his eyes. Suiyu took a glance at a certain spot on the ancestral mountain, then said, "I know what you're trying to do, Du Mao. You can give it a try, and I'll wait for you." After that, he sliced another opening into the barrier around the ancestral mountain with a casual slash of his sword, then made his way outside. From there onward at night, Suiyu would hover in midair, resting with his eyes closed near the border of Parasol Leaf Sect's territory. As soon as the sun began to rise, he would use his sword qi and sword intent to shatter the physical manifestations of the mountain and water fortune in the sect, such as a certain mountain, a certain stretch of river, a huge tree that had hopes of becoming a spirit, a pavilion that was suppressing yin energy, or a subjugation treasure that was buried underground. Only a small amount of spiritual energy was dissipating, so on the surface, the losses didn't appear to be that heavy, but in reality, the consequences were extremely severe. When it came to the fortune of the land, such an unfathomable thing could only be stored in certain places. If it were allowed to drift around erratically, then no one would dare to claim it, as there was no telling whether it would bring fortune or calamity. Suiyu was like an old farmer tilling the land as he began digging into the foundation of Parasol Leaf Sect. Due to the fact that he was near the border, some of the spiritual energy inevitably seeped out of the sect, and initially, no one from the sect dared to come out to recover the spiritual energy and bring it back into the sect. However, this was simply far too severe a loss to bear. So Parasol Leaf Sect sent out a golden core tier cultivator on what was essentially a suicide mission to gather the spiritual energy with an artifact. Much to the cultivator's relief, Suiyu didn't even bother to take a glance at him. Instead, he descended onto the surface of a large river, and the veins of spiritual energy being nurtured in the river were instantly shattered. Emboldened by this turn of events, another golden core tier cultivator emerged from the sect, following Suiyu from dozens of kilometers away to carefully gather the spiritual energy before doing his best to place it back into the water and restore the shattered spiritual energy veins inside. 10 days passed by, and Zuoyu and the cultivators of Parasol Leaf sect coexisted in harmony, with Zuoyu continuing to wreak havoc wherever he went, while Parasol Leaf sect cultivators cleaned up his mess to the best of their abilities. Another 10 days passed by, and the sect lifted its exit restrictions, sending out some cultivators of the middle 5 tiers below the Golden Core tier to follow Zuoyu. All of them did so from dozens of kilometers away with mixed emotions in their hearts. Another 10 days passed by, and many young cultivators of the lower 5 tiers began to join in on the action as well. Fortunately for them, Zuoyu continued to pay no heed to them at all. After the major cold solar term, it wasn't long until the new year. There was a saying among mortals, the turn of the year is a difficult hurdle that has to be overcome every year. Having reigned supreme on Parasol Leaf continent for countless years, this was the first time that Parasol Leaf sect was experiencing just how difficult a hurdle the turn of the year could be. One day, Parasol Leaf sect meticulously planned an ambush that involved 2 unpolished Jade tier cultivators and close to 10 Earth immortals, but Zuoyu was able to brush them all aside with a single slash of his sword. After that, he diverged from his original route, paying a visit to a restricted mountain near the ancestral mountain. That mountain had been gifted to a certain future unpolished Jade tier cultivator to serve as the site for their immortal abode, and with just a single slash of his sword, Zuoyu split the mountain into 2 from top to bottom, creating a massive canyon, following which he casually departed without a word. From that point onward, he continued to chip away at Parasol Leaf sect little by little. It wasn't long before all of the major sects and cultivators at or above the nascent tier on Parasol Leaf continent caught wind of what was happening in Parasol Leaf sect, but seeing as the academy hadn't intervened, no one dared to come and see what was happening for themselves, with the exception of a single person, Jiang Shangzhen. Upon his arrival, he extended a deep and formal bow of apology to Zuoyu, and after observing the severely ravaged Parasol Leaf sect for a while, he suddenly erupted into raucous laughter. As he traveled southward to return to Jade Tablet sect, he made sure to fly extremely slowly, swaggering through the air to taunt the disciples of Parasol Leaf sect below. As a result, he was almost slain on the spot by a sword strike from Zuoyu, but even as he fled for his life, he was still chortling with glee. One day, a young woman appeared before Zuoyu, observing him in a timid manner from afar as she asked in a trembling voice, "Why are you destroying the fortune of our sect for no reason?" At this point, Zuoyu was already a familiar face in Parasol Leaf sect. Some of the sect's disciples thought that he wouldn't be able to hear the hushed discussions that they had about him, but in reality, he was able to hear them as clearly as if they were screaming in his face. After considering the young woman's question for a moment, he replied, "Everyone in your sect seems to be convinced that Du Mao is a blessing from the heavens who'll take the sect to new heights, but if you ask me, he's the one who's going to bring the sect to its destruction. You should have never given birth to him." A furious and embarrassed look appeared on the young woman's face. She was accompanied by the young swordsman who was also expected to form part of the foundation of Parasol Leaf sect's prosperity over the next 1,000 years, and compared with the timid young woman, he had a far more confrontational and abrasive personality. He was carrying a long sword personally gifted to him by Du Mao on his back, and his eyes were filled with resentment as he declared, "You will die by my sword someday." "Oh? In that case, maybe I should get rid of you now so your prophecy doesn't come true," Zuoyu said with an amused smile. The leader of Parasol Leaf sect was still yet to fully recover from his injuries, and he hurriedly descended out of the sky, positioning himself in front of the young man and the young woman to shield them as he apologized to Zuoyu. "Please don't pay him any heed, esteemed sword immortal. He's just had a rush of blood to the head." Zuoyu sat down with his leg crossed on top of a cliff as he said, "I've heard that the cultivators of your Parasol Leaf sect have always had a habit of attacking anyone they don't like the look of. If you can't beat them, then you resort to announcing that you're from Parasol Leaf sect, and after you return to the sect you'll give a sob story to your seniors, who'll then send more people to go after the ones that you failed to defeat. Am I wrong?" The sect leader could only give a wry smile in response. "You must be thinking to yourself, so what if that's true? Right?" Zuoyu chuckled. The sect leader's expression instantly changed drastically. He gave the young man a vicious slap across the face and yelled, "Kneel down and kowtow in apology to this esteemed sword immortal. Keep kowtowing until he tells you to stop." "I'd rather die." The young man spat through gritted teeth as blood began to trickle down from the corner of his lips. Suiyu smiled as he said, "At this point, I have no more interest in educating arrogant so-called prodigy swordsmen like yourself. Your seniors are the ones responsible for how you turned out today, so as the sect leader, you can take another sword strike from me for his transgression." Immediately thereafter, Suiyu's sword pierced through the sect leader's abdomen, and he was once again sent tumbling down from the heavens before crashing into a mountain. As for whether he had intentionally refrained from defending himself in the hope that doing so would be enough to ease Suiyu's fury, that was a question that only he and Suiyu could answer. Suiyu turned his gaze to the young man as he asked, "Are you not going to continue your little act of defiance? Perhaps Du Mao will come out to save you." The young man's complexion had turned deathly pale, and he offered no response. "If you don't say anything, then you're going to die. If you put on a defiant act, you'll probably still die, but perhaps someone will come out to try and save you. What's your choice going to be?" Suiyu asked. A conflicted look appeared in the young man's eyes. All of a sudden, the young woman stepped forward with a desperate look in her eyes as she yelled, "Stop! If you keep doing this, his sword heart is going to break. You're so powerful, why can't you just spare him?" "Go ask your son that question," Suiyu replied with a smile. Tears began to well up in the young woman's eyes again. She had never met someone so unreasonable. Suiyu rose to his feet as he said, "You weren't willing to kowtow to me just now out of a sense of honor. You wanted to make it appear as if you're a courageous and defiant person so that you could make a good impression on the seniors of your sect. But now that you're truly under pressure, you're showing your true colors and revealing the coward under your defiant facade. I've seen far too many arrogant little brats like you for your little act to work on me." Suiyu cast his gaze toward the north as he spoke, and a self-deprecating look appeared on his face as he sighed. "Why is it that only now am I just beginning to realize how great my junior brother is?" Suiyu turned back to the young woman as he continued, "Setting aside Du Mao's transgressions, I'll admit that my actions have reduced you to a laughingstock in the sect, and that is something that I must apologize to you for. Hence, you can state one reasonable request for me to fulfill." The young woman wiped the tears from her eyes as she asked in a skeptical manner, "Really?" Suiyu nodded in response. "You can only state one request, and it must be within reason." The young woman mustered up some courage, then said, "In that case, I want you to spare him and stop oppressing his sword heart." Suiyu nodded in response, and he really did withdraw his sword chi, thereby lifting the immense pressure on the young man. Unbeknownst to the young woman, Suiyu wasn't intentionally targeting the young sword prodigy's sword heart. Instead, the problem was that his sword heart wasn't sufficiently pure to begin with. Otherwise, for a swordsman to stand in Suiyu's presence was an enormous blessing, and he should have only benefited from basking in Suiyu's sword chi. A smile broke through the young woman's tears, but she then hurriedly caught herself and put on a stern expression, determined to not display any gratitude or goodwill toward this enemy of the sect. Suiyu turned to continue on his slow and methodical rampage of destruction, but before he left, he suddenly turned around and said, "I was serious when I said that Du Mao is going to lead the sect to its destruction. All of you will find out what I mean soon." The young woman was rather perplexed to hear this, while the young man was swaying unsteadily, just as his sword heart was. Suiyu sped away without another word. Meanwhile, the phenomena unfolding in Parasol Tree's small world were becoming more and more pronounced. An intercontinental ship from northern Complete Reed Continent had already arrived on eastern Treasured Vial Continent. It was traveling extremely quickly, albeit at the cost of an immense amount of immortal currency, and all of the passengers were naturally very happy to see this. After all, who didn't want to get to their destination sooner? Apparently, the ship was able to travel so fast thanks to a huge sum of money issued by a generous old nascent tier cultivator. One of the ship's passengers was a short and stocky man who lived in one of the cheapest bottom floor rooms, and he very rarely came out. He appeared to be a pure martial artist, but no one could tell his exact cultivation base. The fact that his cultivation base was unidentifiable was more than enough to tell some of the smarter chi refiners on the ship that he was not to be messed with. It was said that there were 3 separate subtiers for 10th tier martial artists, namely the Thriving Chi tier, the Simplification tier, and the Divinity tier. After leaving Lion Peak, Li Er's aura had been steadily climbing the entire time, and he had somehow reached the simplification tier. This was good news for Li Er, and he now felt more confident in his ability to demolish the ancestral halls of those who had wronged Zheng Dafeng. Over in Old Dragon City, the Fan clan continued to stay put, and in the eyes of most of the people in the ancestral hall, this was no different from rolling over and waiting to die. The Sun clan was also keeping a low profile. Even though it had chosen to pledge its subordination to the Fu clan very early on, it didn't seem to be eager to make any displays of loyalty. As usual, the Dust Medicinal Shop was like an independent restricted area left alone by everyone. Chen Ping'an was seated behind the counter with the smallest of the 3 pieces of dragon-slaying platform placed on it. First and 15th were sharpening themselves as they flew back and forth over the piece of dragon-slaying platform in a joyful fashion, sending sparks flying in all directions. Meanwhile, Chen Ping'an was making a tally of his belongings. The golden jade pendant that carried the inscription of Nurturing the Noble Spirit was a small world that could be strapped to his waist and absorb the natural spiritual energy of heaven and earth on its own. However, he couldn't wear it at the moment as it conflicted with the formation in the Dust Medicinal Shop and the Zhao Clan Yin Soul's innate Yin energy. He would only be able to bring it out once he went somewhere else with abundant spiritual energy. Pei Qian was very fond of the jade pendant, and while standing by the counter, she had stroked and admired it for a very long time, but ultimately didn't have the heart to ask Chen Ping'an if she could take it away to play with. At the moment, Chen Ping'an could only temporarily hide the jade pendant. However, compared with the jade pendant, Du Mao's young soul avatar was a much greater concern for Chen Ping'an. It was the body of a true immortal, much like Cui Dongshan's current body. There were many stipulations that had to be followed when it came to using this body, and if he could use it well, then it would benefit him immensely, but even the slightest mistake could ruin the body and turn it into something completely useless. Compared with refining a bonded item, this was an even more difficult task. The first step was known as opening the door. An immortal body was a truly indestructible body, one that even an all-out attack from the bonded flying sword of a middle 5-tier swordsman wouldn't even be able to leave a mark on. The second step was that of occupation, which involved planting a new soul into the body, just as Cui Dongshan had done when possessing his new body. The soul had to be complete and sufficiently powerful, and it also had to belong to someone with immense mental fortitude. Otherwise, there was a very good chance that Du Mao would be able to wrest back control over his body, and if he was allowed to return to Parasol Leaf Sect, then the consequences would be catastrophic. The third problem that had to be addressed was the body's maintenance. A vacant immortal body could easily be stored for thousands of years with no problems, but once it became possessed, the maintenance was going to become extremely costly. The fourth issue that had to be considered was how this new Du Mao was going to develop and what cultivation path he was going to choose. If none of this was thought out in advance, then the body would go to waste. In mortal empires, a piece of praise that was often thrown around was that one had the makings of a prime minister. However, that didn't mean that one was necessarily destined for great things. There was still a very long way to go, and a lot of luck involved. Chen Ping'an had inquired the Zhao clan Yin Soul on this subject, but the latter had only given him a very ambiguous response. This was a matter that concerned many sensitive secrets, so he didn't dare to reveal too much. At the moment, he owed Fan Junmao 50 grain rain coins, and there weren't many gold essence copper coins left in his little cloth pouch. The recent expenditures had been far too high, and at this rate it wouldn't take long before he completely ran out of money. Earlier, Pei Qian had made a rather interesting remark about how time passed like a flying sword, whizzing past in a flash before vanishing without a trace. Chen Ping'an felt like the money in his pocket was vanishing even faster than a passing flying sword. He heaved a faint sigh as he stowed the jade tablet away. There weren't going to be any customers visiting the medicinal shop anyway, so he simply allowed 1st and 15th to continue sharpening themselves as they pleased. 1st and 15th had both endured many battles of late, and as a result, their blades had become much duller than before. According to the Zhao clan Yin Soul, if he were to continue to use them in this fashion, then eventually their blades would become chipped, and that would be a major problem. However, the problem could be remedied by allowing them to devour this piece of dragon-slaying platform. It was only a tiny piece of dragon-slaying platform, but it was something that countless swordsmen in the world could only dream of obtaining, and it could be sold for a large sum of grain rain coins. There was a reason why almost all swordsmen without powerful backers were extremely poor. Even Aoyang had accumulated some massive debts during his travels across Middle-earth Divine Continent prior to going to Stalactite Mountain. Having said that, not all of his expenditure had been for sword maintenance purposes. In fact, most of his spending had been dedicated to covering the costs of the repairs carried out by the oppressed and underprivileged sects that he came across. It was common knowledge that swordsmen had the hardest time saving money. The reason for this was both simple and complicated. It was simple in that the only thing that they had to spend money on was their swords, so they didn't even have to think about any other treasures. Having said that, a flying sword was much more difficult to maintain than any other treasure used by chi refiners. If a chi refiner truly found themselves lacking in funds, then they could always sell off some of their belongings for money, but what could a swordsman sell? Their bonded flying sword? Pei Qian couldn't bear the pain of bodily conditioning, but she still wanted to learn martial arts. She was willing to learn any form of martial arts as long as it didn't hurt. For example, on this day, Pei Qian had gone to Lu Baixiang for martial arts instruction. Wei Xian didn't want to teach her, and he had become very frustrated by her constant nagging, so he had retreated to his room and rolled himself up in his blankets to sleep. Pei Qian was furious and prodded at him insistently with her hiking pole, only to be completely ignored, so she could only turn to Lu Baixiang instead. After making his way out into the courtyard, Lu Baixiang paused momentarily to consider what he was going to teach Pei Qian, then began imitating Chan Ping'an's six-step walking meditation, carrying it out in a very elegant and graceful manner. As he performed the walking meditation, he turned to Pei Qian with a smile as he said, "It might sound a little counterintuitive, but when it comes to practicing fist techniques, the footwork is actually the most important thing. Out of the four of us, Zhu Lian is the one with the most exceptional footwork. His footwork is both fast and meticulous, allowing him to adjust to all types of situations on the battlefield." After completing the 6 steps, Lu Baixiang threw a punch that appeared to be quite gentle, but created a loud thump in the air, and he continued, "Only by drawing upon power from all directions can your fist aura shake the heavens." He then unleashed a sweeping kick, and after completing a light and graceful landing, he continued, "One's spine is like a dragon vein between heaven and earth, and that's why the concept of examining the dragon exists in martial arts. It's not particularly profound, but it's extremely important. The vertebrae of the spine resemble the flexible body of a dragon, allowing one to generate explosive power. A single breath of pure true qi can circulate hundreds, even thousands of kilometers through one's acupoints and meridians, activating all of the skin, muscles, tendons, bone, and blood in one's entire body to maximize the power of each attack." Zhu Lian was seated on a bench under the eaves, reading a romantic story about a loving couple, and a pleased smile appeared on his face upon hearing the praise that Lu Baixiang was directing toward him. Lu Baixiang was an extremely patient teacher, and he smiled as he asked, "Can you understand what I'm saying? If not, I can break it down into even finer detail for you." Pei Qian nodded vigorously in response. "I can understand everything, but I don't want to learn to walk." "If you don't first learn how to walk, how will you be able to run or fly?" Lu Baixiang asked with a smile. Pei Qian took a glance at halting snow strapped to Lu Baixiang's waist and she said, "But I just want to learn the best swordsmanship under the heavens. If I can't do that, then saber techniques will suffice as well." At some point, Chan Ping'an had sat down onto a nearby bench to watch the lesson, and Lu Baixiang turned to him with a resigned expression as he said, "I can't teach her." As soon as Pei Qian caught sight of Chan Ping'an, a fearful look immediately appeared on her face as she hurriedly said, "In that case, I'll learn how to walk first. If one is constantly sitting on the fence, they'll never know to stand up for themselves," Zhu Lian mused. Pei Qian raised her hiking pole with a furious look on her face as she objected, "Don't think that you can talk trash as you please just because you can cook some good meals. Come and fight me if you dare." Zhu Lian closed his book and rose to his feet as he declared, "Fine, if you want a sparring match, then I'll give you one. I'll have you know that I'm the most capable fighter among all of the chefs in the dust medicinal shop." Pei Qian wasn't fearful in the slightest as she demanded, "All right, then let's compete to see who can make the fastest transcriptions." Zhu Lian sat back down onto his stool and continued to read his book. Chan Ping'an paid no heed to their bickering as he smiled and rose to his feet, and for the first time since being dealt those horrific injuries by Du Mao, he was in a pleasant and relaxed mood. He gently drifted over to the center of the courtyard, and even though his complexion still wasn't looking that great, he appeared to be in high spirits. He slowly performed his 6-step walking meditation in conjunction with his deity drumming technique, and his fist intent was extremely natural, exuding from his body without any conscious effort. It was a very simple 6-step walking meditation routine, but when performed in earnest by Qian Pingyan, Pei Qian felt like it was very pleasing on the eyes, almost like a visual treat. Zhu Lian raised his head with an impressed smile as he sighed. What remarkable fist intent at such a young age. Indeed, I can't even begin to compare, Lu Baixiang replied with a nod. After completing his 6-step walking meditation, Qian Pingyan looked around with a smile as he said, "It's your turn now, Sui Yubian Wei Xian." Sui Yubian was standing in silence by the window, and she turned and made her way back to the table before sitting down, while Wei Xian remained in the room as he praised in a half-hearted manner. That was an incredible display. Pei Qian fell to the ground and began chortling with mirth. These people had no spines at all, yet they dared to call her a fence-sitter. To everyone's surprise, Zhang Dafeng suddenly appeared at the entrance of his room, and he looked up at the sun while holding onto the door frame for support as he sighed. I can finally move a little. I was about to start growing mold if I kept lazing around. You can walk now, Zhang Dafeng? Pei Qian exclaimed with a surprised expression. Don't force yourself. If you fall and break your back again, you'll be back to square one. Can't you wish something good upon me for once? Zhang Dafeng groaned in an exasperated manner. I was just looking out for you, Pei Qian replied with a roll of her eyes. Qian Pingyan gave Zhang Dafeng a nod, then sat back down onto the bench, and Pei Qian immediately brought some sunflower seeds to him like an obedient little puppy. The two of them sat on the bench together, and she was holding a handful of sunflower seeds aloft in front of Qian Pingyan on her little hand. Zhang Dafeng walked very slowly, taking small steps as he strolled under the eaves, and it was clear that he had no intention of forcing himself to go beyond his current capabilities. His back remained hunched over. Everyone continued with what they were doing as if they couldn't even see him. Lu Baixiang carried the go board and stones over to Sui Yubian to play another game. Zhu Lian continued to read his book. Wei Xian was sleeping in his room, and Pei Qian was eating sunflower seeds with Qian Pingyan. A festive air had descended upon the little medicinal shop. One day at around noon, the dust medicinal shop welcomed its first customer that wasn't Fan Air or Fan Junmao. This was a true customer. It was an old man with a foreign accent, and he bought a lot of medicinal ingredients from the shop, but complained that the prices were a little steep. The Zhao Clanin Soul cautioned Qian Pingyan through voice transmission that he could only tell that the old man had a very solid and condensed Dragon Gate tier cultivation base. Qian Pingyan was unfazed. Having already faced the Ascension tier Du Mao, he had become far more composed in the face of powerful cultivators. Qian Pingyan had been struck by some enlightenment after hearing the message from the scholarly sage recounted to him by the sword spirit. The principles of the world were ever present, and some people treated them like precious treasures to be cherished, while others treated them with disdain and would perhaps even go out of their way to trample upon them. It wasn't the principles that were wrong. Instead, the problem lay with the people. In particular, the sword spirit had spoken in some detail about the elderly Confucian scholar presiding over the northern region of Parasol Leaf Continent. It seemed that the consequences he was suffering for his transgressions were quite severe, and there was a chance that he would be evicted from the Confucian temple altogether. Qian Pingyan couldn't help but contemplate the complexities of human nature after hearing about this. The elderly Confucian scholar was one of the 72 saints of the Confucian temple, yet even he had done something so unreasonable and completely against Confucian etiquette. And yet despite his transgressions, was it fair to say that his knowledge and principles hadn't had any positive effect on Majestic World? That was naturally not the case. In fact, he definitely had quite a significant positive impact on Majestic World. The elderly scholar had proclaimed that he was targeting Qian Pingyan for the sake of the bigger picture, and what was best for the continuation of the heritage of Confucianism. Was he wrong to say that? Recently, Qian Pingyan had been frequently pondering the major principles that he had no time to mull over in the past. Given his injuries, it wasn't like he had anything better to do anyway. The old foreigner visiting the medicinal shop was a very talkative man, and he was selecting medicinal ingredients to buy while chatting with Chan Ping'an, who was filling in as shopkeeper. While paying for his purchase, the old man smiled as he asked, "Would you like to hear a piece of advice from me, young man?" The Zhao clan's soul was lurking in the shadows, and he immediately tensed up slightly upon hearing this. "Go ahead," Chan Ping'an prompted with a smile. Chan Ping'an shook his head in response. "It's all right. Even if business is a little slow, it's enough to get by." "It's not good for someone your age to sound so much like a jaded old man," the old man chuckled. Chan Ping'an smiled and offered no response. "You can probably tell from my accent that I'm not from these parts," the old man continued. "Having said that, I've heard about what's recently happened in Old Dragon City, and that's why I came to visit this shop. You're clearly no fool, so I'm sure you're aware that no local from Old Dragon City would come to visit your shop at a time. The only people who would visit your shop now are unfathomable outsiders like myself, isn't that right?" Chan Ping'an didn't know what to make of this, and he could only reply, "You're certainly very open and honest." The old man pointed in the direction of the street outside as he said, "I'm currently living in a small inn not far away from here. Rest assured, I don't harbor any ill will." All of a sudden, he revealed his golden core tier cultivation base as he smiled and asked, "Can you give me a little discount, seeing as I'm a golden core tier earth immortal?" The Zhao clan's soul almost sprang out of hiding upon seeing this. Chan Ping'an shook his head in response. "I'm afraid I can't do that. If you want to come and have a chat, then you're free to visit our shop at any time, but we don't offer any discounts here." The old man picked up the packages of medicinal ingredients that he had purchased, then took a glance at Chan Ping'an as he sighed. "Why would I come and chat with you? It's not like you're a pretty woman." Right at this moment, Sui Yubian made her way into the shop. Even though the old man had only released his golden core tier aura for an instant, she was still alerted and immediately arrived on the scene. As soon as the old man caught sight of Sui Yubian, he immediately turned back to Chan Ping'an with a serious expression as he said, "I'm actually a merchant who specializes in selling medicinal ingredients, so I'll be coming here every day from now on. Make sure to open up early and close late for me." Chan Ping'an smiled as he nodded in response. As the old man left the medicinal shop, he seemed to be in very high spirits, so much so that there was a bounce in his step. Sui Yubian had already returned to her room, and Wei Xian and Zhu Lian also departed, while Lu Baixiang strode over to the counter as he asked, "Was that old man really only at the golden core tier?" The Zhao clan's soul revealed himself as he answered, "He's either a golden core tier cultivator, or he's an immortal tier cultivator in disguise." "Surely not," Lu Baixiang said with a wry smile. "There aren't that many immortal tier cultivators even on the entirety of Parasol Leaf Continent." The old man returned that very same afternoon to purchase more medicinal ingredients, granting the dust medicinal shop close to 30 taels of silver of additional earnings. As he departed, he was still looking around trying to find Sui Yubian. That night, while everyone was having dinner together, Chan Ping'an declared, "I'm sure the old man who came to visit today would get along very well with Zheng Dafeng and Zhu Lian." Zhu Lian was eager to make himself useful and he volunteered, "If he comes again tomorrow, then I'll have a chat with him to see what he's all about. Rest assured, it won't take me long at all to find out if he's a good man or not." "Make sure you don't overdo it and cause trouble," Chan Ping'an cautioned. "You can count on me," Zhu Lian replied with a smile. The next morning, the old man entered the alley, and at this point, the medicinal shop still wasn't open yet, so he squatted down outside to wait. Even though Chan Ping'an was already awake at this point, he still waited until the normal opening time before opening the shop's doors. While Chan Ping'an was helping the old man pick out medicinal ingredients, Zhu Lian approached them, acting as if he were absorbed in his own thoughts as he mused. "Beautiful maidens can be found even on the most mundane of streets." The old man's eyes lit up as he answered, "Just as they can be found in the most opulent of settings." Their eyes met, and in that instant, both were convinced that they had just made a friend for life. After that, Chan Ping'an was completely kicked to the side as the two old men began chatting with each other as if they had been close friends for decades. That morning, the dust medicinal shop made a profit of 80 taels of silver. Chan Ping'an didn't eavesdrop on the conversation as he didn't want to be rude, so after the old man departed, he asked Zhu Lian what the two of them had discussed. Zhu Lian smiled as he replied, I spoke with that old senior about some reading materials and the books that we both like to read. As Zhu Lian was making his way out into the backyard, he slammed a fist into his own hand as he murmured to himself, "What an impressive man he is. I can tell that he's truly dedicated to his art." Qian Pingyan shook his head in response. He had presumed that these two would get along well, but not this well. Once Zhang Dafeng was sufficiently recovered to join in on their conversations, there would never be a quiet moment in the shop anymore. A few days ago, Zhang Dafeng had almost been cut down by Sui Yubian's sword. The reason for this was that his disciple, Fan had commissioned an extremely lifelike portrait for him. After getting his hands on the portrait, Zhang Dafeng hung it up on the wall of his room, and he was all but worshipping it every single day. In the end, Pei Qian was the one who spilled the beans, and Sui Yubian stormed into Zhang Dafeng's room to discover that it really was a portrait of her. Not only that, but she was depicted to be extremely scantily dressed with a seductive smile on her face. If Qian Pingyan hadn't gotten in between them, Zhang Dafeng would have been in serious danger of being cut down on the spot. In the end, Qian Pingyan plucked the portrait down from the wall, despite Zhang Dafeng's pitiable pleas for him not to, and he gave the portrait to Sui Yubian for her to do as she saw fit. Only then was the conflict defused, but Sui Yubian's already terrible impression of Zhang Dafeng was worsened even further in the wake of that incident. Despite his efforts in mediating the conflict, Qian Pingyan didn't fare any better than Zhang Dafeng. Instead of destroying the portrait, Sui Yubian gave it to him with a cold sneer, saying that he should keep it, considering he and Zhang Dafeng were both lecherous pieces of scum anyway. After mulling over the sequence of events leading up to the incident, Qian Pingyan decided that Pei Qian was at fault for spilling the beans, and he dragged her away by the ear to make her complete a transcription of 1,500 characters. Fan had been quite smart in that he refrained from paying any further visits to the shop after delivering the portrait. Otherwise, Qian Pingyan would have been sure to give him a good beating. The end of the year was coming up, and some preparations had to be made for the festive season. Fan Junmao paid the shop a visit, informing Qian Pingyan that the Fu clan had approached the Fan clan in private. Fu Qi had personally visited Fan Junmao and promised her that the Fu clan was going to offer a tremendous sum of compensation to the dust medicinal shop. Pei Qian, Wei Xian and Sui Yubian went out to do some shopping. Sui Yubian had only decided to go as she couldn't stand Pei Qian's insistent begging. On this day, the old man who would come to the medicinal shop to chat with Zhu Lian every day was seated at the intersection between the street and the alley outside the shop, pretending to mind his own business while stealing glances at Sui Yubian as she walked past. Recently, Zhu Lian had become even more diligent and conscientious with his reading. The old man had gifted him many brand new books, clearly very high quality, and he had been staying up to read almost every night in the past few days. By the time Pei Qian's trio returned for their shopping trip, it was already nighttime. Qian Pingyan closed the shop, then sat down on a bench before taking a sip of the basic refinement medicinal wine in his sword-nurturing gourd. After playing the entire day outside, Pei Qian had gone to bed very early. Of course, she had completed her transcriptions before that. Lu Baixiang strode over to Qian Pingyan's side, then sat down beside him, and the two of them chatted about some of the interesting stories of this world. Lu Baixiang found these stories to be very eye-opening, and he mused that the prominent powers in the lotus flower-blessed land could certainly do worse than emulate some of the practices employed by the sects in this world. Lu Baixiang heaved a faint sigh, then said in an earnest voice, "This really is a completely different world. There are so many nuances to consider even when it comes to accepting disciples here. The lotus flower-blessed land can't compare." He then turned to Qian Pingyan with a smile as he said, "No wonder you're being so strict with Pei Qian." Qian Pingyan nodded as he replied, "Taking on a disciple is indeed a very difficult task. It's not just about teaching whatever you please. Initially, I didn't want to teach Pei Qian. After that, I changed my mind, but I didn't dare to teach her. Now I don't know what or how to teach her." Qian Pingyan raised his head to look up at the night sky as he continued. Zhu Lian always liked to joke about how much of a fence-sitter Pei Qian is, about how she sways from side to side like a blade of grass depending on which direction the wind blows. However, I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. Everyone is as delicate as a blade of grass as a child, but at that stage, it's extremely important for the blade of grass to take root firmly. A blade of grass will always sway with the wind, but as long as it's firmly rooted to the ground, it'll never lose its way. After that, the blade of grass develops into a bamboo shoot. Some people detest bamboo and vow to cut down all of the bamboo under the heavens, but many scholars are very fond of bamboo, and there's even a bamboo sea small world in this world. After that, the bamboo shoot grows into a mighty tree. During a past journey of mine, I was accompanied for some time by an extremely powerful swordsman. Thinking back now, I feel like he regarded me much like I regard Pei Qian now. Just as I'm currently assessing Pei Qian's character, he was also silently assessing mine. At the time, I had only just begun practicing fist techniques. Could he not have taught me advanced swordsmanship? Could he not have given me a sip of some medicinal wine brewed using a beast core? Could he not have taught me a top-tier bodily refinement cultivation art? Could he not have given me a bunch of treasures? He could have easily done all of that without even batting an eyelid, but he didn't. Why didn't he do that? I never considered this question before, and even after I began to consider it, I couldn't think of an answer. That, until Pei Qian came into my life. The scholarly sage told me that we live in a very complicated world, and that we'll encounter many different pieces of scenery in the walk of life. Sometimes we'll stumble upon good times, while other times we'll have to trudge our way through dark times. Chen Ping'an's voice trailed off here, and he drank his last sip of medicinal wine for the night. At this point, his cheeks were already flushed bright red. Chen Ping'an very rarely discussed matters like these with outsiders, and he was only willing to open up to Lu Baixiang as he felt like Lu Baixiang was the type of person who would be able to understand. He didn't understand why he felt this way, but he did nonetheless. It was just a gut feeling, just like how old man Yao and Ruanchong instinctively didn't want to accept him as their disciple. Chen Ping'an secured his sword nurturing gourd to his waist, then rubbed his hands over his face and heaved a faint sigh. Regardless of what I see in the world, whether it be good or bad, I always want to see deeper, to see a little clearer. If it's a person or thing that doesn't matter much, then I try my best to see the good in it. Just because someone doesn't like me or holds conflicting ideals with mine, doesn't mean that they're necessarily a bad person. There's a master martial artist by the name of Lu Zong in your lotus flower blessed land, and he said something to me that I think is very interesting. He said, "The road beneath our feet is very wide, so we can each go our own way without any problems." I think he's perfectly correct in saying that. However, there are always going to be good or bad people in this world, and outside of things that are absolutely right or wrong, everything else is in a gray area. For example, that Ascension tier cultivator Du Mao must have done many bad things in life, but he must have also done some good things. In fact, there's a very good chance that in Parasol Leaf Sect, he's considered to be a saint that countless disciples would be willing to sacrifice themselves for. Lu Baixiang gently placed his hands onto his knees as he smiled and said, "Do you think everyone is a glutton for punishment like yourself? Spending all day pondering concepts like right or wrong like you do is an extremely tortuous endeavor. Many people learn martial arts, sword techniques, and immortal abilities only for their own sake. In the process of standing up for others, so-called heroes often end up killing perceived evildoers who they don't even know, yet they're widely lauded for their actions. Is that right or wrong? If someone breaks their father out of prison, killing many wardens in the process, only to go on to become a high-ranking official that goes down in the history books as a man of the people and an impeccable son, is that right or wrong? There are many people out there who are only wronged by a single person, but decide to take their vengeance on the entire world. Some people have managed to do this while others were unable to, but they would have if they could. In the walk of life, some people see a flower in the wilderness, and that could inspire hope within them. Meanwhile, others are extremely bitter and envious, so all they can see on the ground is shit. They're forced to eat shit all the time due to how bitter and unhappy they are, and they can't stand to see others not having to eat shit. After all, even shit can fill one's belly. How do you know that? Have you eaten it before? Chen Ping'an asked in a very unceremonious manner. Then he hurriedly added, "Forget I ever asked that."